IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Thursday, April 6th. I appreciate y'all letting me have yesterday off so I could have some fun and celebrate my anniversary with my wife, the big 15 yesterday, Ryan. And so we are back, though. And today we're going to dive into some fun topics. Before we do, I do have a couple house cleaning things I would love to bring up with y'all. I want to ask if you are listening via our podcast app, via the Irish Breakdown Podcast feed, I would ask that you kind of go to CFB Nation and to subscribe there. At some point in time this summer, we are going to remove the CFB Nation channels, which includes Lucky Lefty, from the Irish Breakdown feed, so we can clean up a little bit and get that back over to CFB where it's belonged. We're trying to really help give those channels a push. So if you like that stuff, if you like what you're getting from Lucky Lefty, you like what you're getting from CFB Nation, Rise and Draft, Ryan's Draft is on there. We have a couple other things we're planning that we're going to definitely have during the summer. And as we get into the fall, some things I'm going to be doing on the CFB Nation channel, some other things we've got going on. You're going to love what we're doing, but you need to be subscribed to that channel because eventually we're going to take those things off of the Irish Breakdown feed and put them onto the CFB Nation feed. So if you could do us a favor, if you're a podcast listener, go now to CFB Nation. You'll see our red, white, and blue logo and subscribe to that as well. And that way you get alerts for both of those channels, and you'll know the schedule will be very similar to what it is now once we make that move, but this way it'll just be coming from two feeds. So we're not just overloading one of the feeds like we are right now. So just make sure that you are working on that. I would greatly, greatly appreciate if you all could do that for us. And what we're going to do today, Ryan, is we're going to dive into several different topics. We're going to sort of have this, we've talked about wanting to have this midweek roundup thing, and practices and some other things have kind of kept us from diving into that, but we want to bring that back today. And so we're going to talk about a few different topics today. And a couple of them are going to be centered around one similar topic, and that's going to be quarterback Sam Hartman, Ryan. So we're going to talk about a couple different things with Sam Hartman. We're going to discuss the notion of an alpha receiver. Does Notre Dame need an alpha receiver? They didn't last year. Do they need one in 2023? We're going to dive into that. Who would that be, Ryan? Who might that be? And then the last thing, and this is going to be more of a, I'm going to tee him up and say, hey, here comes the deuce. Here comes the curveball. Knocked it out of the park. I'm going to tee Ryan up for just something that I know is driving both of us nuts, but especially him because it's in his wheelhouse, is this overthinking of Michael Mayer. And very similar to what happened last year with Kyle Hamilton, and we've seen with some other Notre Dame players in past years, where that just kind of gets overthought a little bit. And is it just a particular to these Notre Dame players? It just happens to be Notre Dame players. They're not the only ones. Is it something about Notre Dame that's causing this? I'm going to pick Brian's brain a little bit on that. And so we're going to have some fun today. And then, of course, Ryan, at the end of it, we're going to have a mailbag. We do need to get out of here around 4:30 today, so we're going to just try to dive right into this, get rocking and rolling, so we'll have time for all of your amazing questions. We already got a dozen of them started already, and I know there's going to be some more that come out. So, Ryan, I want to start things off with our first topic today, and that is really Sam Hartman and where he ranks among the nation's best quarterbacks. And we're kind of talk about this, and then we're going to dive into what he can be for Notre Dame this year, how good we think he can be for Notre Dame this year. And then also, like, what does he need to do if Notre Dame, for him to be a part of Notre Dame being a title contender? Because I think you and I would agree that if the quarterback position, look, I love the running backs, I love the O-line, I love the receivers, tight ends. I mean, there's a lot of talent in Notre Dame, but they're not in a position as a top to bottom roster to win a championship if the quarterback position is not outstanding.
I agree.
And we're going to dive into that and just kind of get thoughts of what exactly would that look like for Sam Hartman? Is he capable of it? And then just kind of go from there. So first, Ryan, you and I had a fun conversation. This is such an intriguing year at quarterback, in my opinion, because there's not a lot of proven commodities that are coming off proven commodity type seasons.
Sure.
And as we kind of look at who the top quarterbacks are in college football and where Sam Hartman ranks, it's really going to be a fascinating year because there's some young guys that are on the verge of breaking out. There's some guys coming back from injuries or really down seasons that are at new schools. And then, of course, there's the guys that that were proven last year. Some are where they were last year, and in Sam Hartman's case, he's moved on.
Yeah.
And it is also fascinating of how many of the top quarterbacks in the country are transfers. So you and I came up with a top five, and 4 of the 5 were transfers, guys that transfers from other schools. And so, and then if you kind of dive into the top 10, there are also a lot of transfers. So it is really fascinating how many quarterbacks just move around during their careers. So, because obviously we will get into Jordan Travis. He started his career at Louisville. Sam Hartman started his career at Wake Forest. So to begin, Ryan, let's talk about the top 5 quarterbacks in college football. Sam Hartman place, and who are some other top contenders? It's going to be a little bit of a fun sort of look at where Notre Dame's quarterback stacks up. So to begin, you and I have the same 1-2. Caleb Williams 1, Drake May 2. I think that if Drake May had a little bit better supporting cast and a little bit more certainty on the offensive coordinator position, I'd say we could debate that 1 versus 2. But the way the season's ended with Drake kind of fit, I'd say by week 8 or 9, I was in the Drake May needs to be the Heisman winner, right? But that's why you don't hand a Heisman out in week 8 or 9. You wait till the season is over with, because Caleb Williams put USC on his shoulders in the last month of the season, and Drake's team kind of faltered, and Drake couldn't do the same things Caleb was able to do as far as putting his team on his shoulders. And that's why Caleb won and deserved the Heisman Trophy, in my opinion, last year. And then number 3, you and I agree, based on production last year at this point in time, is Michael Penix from Washington. Led the nation last year in passing yards, threw for 4,641 yards, threw for 31 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, bounced back from an injury-riddled season, was consistently productive, right? I mean, his lowest yards total of the season came in the bowl game when he threw for 287 yards against Texas. Was a very inefficient game for him, but he made the plays he needed to do to win. Benefited, obviously, from a schedule that let's be honest, didn't have a lot of great defenses on it, but he still did what nobody else could do, which is rip those defenses up to a level that nobody else really could. Then we started getting into now. I think that's a given based on last year's production, but I think that people could make a strong case that Sam Hartman could be in the conversation for that number 3 spot. Because I think after 1-2, there's more debate, but we'll go with Michael Penix at number 3. I think also because Michael Penix is returning to an offense, we know his relationship with the town around him. All those receivers are coming back from Washington from last year. That's really what to me why I'm not concerned about. Okay, I'm comfortable with Michael Penix being there for now. Get in that 4 or 5, Ryan, and this is where you start to have a little bit of debate, because not just the 2 that you and I have 4 and 5, because we have the same guys 4 and 5, just in a little bit different order, but also the number of guys who can be pushing for that spot. So let's kind of go in here. You went number 4, Ryan. You went with Jordan Travis.
Yep.
I went with Sam Hartman. So let's begin. Let's have a little bit of fun here. State your case, Mr. Roberts. Why did Jordan Travis number 4?
Well, I think first and foremost, this conversation is so nuanced and fun because for the first time we were talking about the other day, right, Brian? It's like for the first time in forever, Ohio State doesn't have a returning quarterback. Alabama doesn't have a returning quarterback. Georgia doesn't have a returning quarterback. A lot of these schools that we usually can depend upon to bring back proven production and impact players at the quarterback position aren't doing that this year, right? So, we're talking about Washington having a guy, right? And Florida State having a guy. They haven't had a guy on these types of preseason lists in a couple of years until now, obviously, with Jordan Travis. I went back and forth with this one, honestly, because I think if you just look at a full resume, right, the entirety of a career, I think you look at it and say, Sam Hartman probably deserves it. And I wouldn't push back on you at all. And honestly, I'm not going to push back too much on you putting him at number 4. I think the thing that you said.
Likewise, by the way. Yes. Likewise. I mean, it's splitting hairs, Ryan. It's not like, oh my God, why did I hire this guy? I can't believe I hired this guy. I can't believe he has Jordan Travis ahead of Sam Hartman. I'm not there.
Well, and I think you mentioned something perfectly before, and it's also why Michael Penix was number 3 for me. It's because of what's returning around them and the situation that they're returning into, right? I think Sam Hartman's going to do tremendous in Notre Dame. Everyone knows that listens to this channel. But there is some uncertainty there, right? Like you haven't seen him play in a Notre Dame uniform yet. You have to see if guys like Deion Colesy and Tobias Merriweather and Jaden Thomas and Lorenzo Styles, if they could take that step up. If they can, then I think Sam Hartman's going to put up some stupid numbers for Notre Dame this year, some of the best that we've seen in recent memory. But when you look at Michael Penix, for instance, he's got Jalen McMillan coming back, Roma Dunes, coming back, Giles Jackson. Like he's got all his receivers coming back. It's similar with what Jordan Travis is coming back. Like they lost the one running back to the transfer portal who's a solid player, but they bring back Trey Benson, who's their best running back last year.
And that guy left because he was going to be behind Trey Benson and because they're loaded at running back. Exactly.
Absolutely loaded. Yeah. Trey Benson's a legit NFL running back, I think, in a couple of years. Like he's a very good player. They bring back Johnny Wilson. They bring back a lot of the receivers outside of Cameron McDonald was their tight end, but he wasn't really used heavily in that offense anyway, right? But you return same offensive coordinator as well. Alex Atkins is now back for his second year at Florida State, which I think is big time, right? Like Jordan Travis started showing these signs in 2021, but man, I thought Alex Atkins and that offensive staff really took his game to a much higher level in 2022, and he really showed off that he is becoming that type of player. And honestly, thinking back to a few years ago, like 2 to 3 years ago at this point, if you would have told me at this point that Jordan Travis would be a top 5 quarterback potentially in college football entering a season, would have called you crazy, man. I did not see that type of upside with him. I thought he was a good athlete and he would be a good dual threat type of option, but not what he is now. So hats off to the Florida State staff, offensive staff first and foremost, because they've developed him very well. But honestly, it was just the consistency around him and the known product that made me put him at 4 over Hartman, just because Hartman, there is some things that you have to project a little bit. And there are some receivers that you think are going to step up, but until you actually see them step up in a game, it is projection at that point.
Just for clarification, Ryan, when you say some things you need to project, are you talking just about the receivers and the relationship with the receivers, or is it what else would it be?
It's part of it. So one is the
offense.
Yeah, I mean, one is first-year offensive coordinator there, right? That's an unknown that we need to see, honestly, what that looks like from a play calling perspective and from a day-to-day perspective. You also have the wide receivers. We know that Deion Colzie is stupid talented. We know Tobias Merriweather is stupid talented. We know that Jane Thomas was playing really good football at the end of 2022 season. We know that Lorenzo Styles, when he is dialed in and confident, is a really talented football player. But the fact of the matter is that all of those guys, the leading receiver was only in the 300s as far as receiving yards last year, right? So like there's not a ton of proven production coming back. You've seen it in spurts, but from the entirety of the football season, you haven't seen it consistently. So that's a question mark. The offensive play calling is a question mark until we see it. And then how Sam Hartman just fits into the structure, into the offense, with the wide receivers. Exactly.
So. Okay.
It's the outside surroundings that are just things that you need to answer and see what happens.
The reason that I'm going Hartman number 4 is because number 1, the production is significantly better than what Jordan Travis had. I mean, if you even look at last year, which was a year for Sam Hartman where he had less production. It wasn't much, like 8 yards of total offense, less than what he had the year before. His yards per play was very close. He was 7.35 in 21, 7.23 this past year. He was 319.2 yards per game, and Jordan Travis is 279.3. Now, Jordan Travis was higher because of the nature of the offense. It's more of a downfield offense. He's got more running production than what Sam Hartman did this past season. Jordan Travis is an interesting player. A buddy of mine actually had said to me, I'll still remember this. I'll give him credit for this. My friend Tony said when he watched Jordan Travis against Notre Dame in 2020, he's like, don't be shocked if this kid becomes just an excellent quarterback, because he's just such a playmaker. I mean, he's unorthodox and he's not really a natural quarterback per se, like an NFL draft prospect kind of guy, but just as a college football player. Who he reminds me a ton of is Joe Hamilton. Like he's a modern day Joe Hamilton from Georgia Tech, who was one of my favorite quarterbacks.
I used to play with Joe Hamilton. I remember it was like one of the NFL games. I used to get him as a free agent. I used to just like build him up, dude. He was so much fun because he was so athletic, man. He was a really athletic player. Yeah.
So it reminds me a lot of him in today's game. But the thing about it is I just feel like Sam Hartman still has proven that he can more consistently run offenses. I think the thing about the town around him, all the points you made are fair, but I would argue that what we know about Notre Dame is still going to be better top to bottom than what he had at Wake Forest. Sure. Notre Dame's defense at what it was last year, which disappointed everybody, was still light years better than what Wake Forest was last year. The offensive line and run game is going to be light years better than what it was. The pass game stuff is legitimate. What's his relationship going to be like with those receivers? I think it's a very fair thing to say. How will he fit into the offense? I think those are very fair things to say. But I would argue that the town around him is going to be better. Wake Forest has a lot more proven production at receiver, no
Yeah.
question. Last year, A.T. Perry was a multi-year difference maker. He wasn't just a guy that broke out in 2022 and had a great year. A.T. Perry's been making plays for years for Wake Forest. Donovan Green's been that guy. And so then some other guys stepped up as like the number 3s and number 4s. The other part, the final piece to me, Ryan, is, I mean, the head-to-head has to matter to some degree. The fact of the matter is Sam Hartman's 3-0 against Florida State, and he's 2-0 in games against Jordan Travis, and the games haven't been overly close. I mean, last year's game was 31-21, but it was 28-7 at one point in time in the second half. I mean, it wasn't really that close. Florida State closed it. If you remember, they closed it to 3 or a touchdown early in the fourth quarter, made it 28-21. And Sam Hartman, they did what they needed to do, went right down the field, and got it back. Went on a nice long 6.5-minute drive to ice the game. Hartman hit a couple really key third downs. They had a rushing third down, and then they just went right down the field and put the game away. And then, of course, it was 35-14 the year before. And you can't tell me convincingly that in those 2 years, Wake Forest had better players than what Florida State had. At receiver, sure, but the gap this year wasn't as good as you mentioned. That Florida State has some pretty good receivers this year, and I think that all the stuff that you're concerned about with Sam Hartman, which is all fair, is exactly what the conditions were for Jordan Travis going into last year. Bunch of new receivers, because remember, a lot of the receivers at Florida State last year were transfers. Trey Benson was a transfer. Wilson was a transfer. Yeah. Pittman was a transfer. Yeah. You had some transfers on the offensive line. And then, of course, you had a first-year offensive coordinator in Alex Atkins. So I think that's all fair points. And I think right now in April, we need, as Notre Dame analysts, need to be in a wait-and-see mode. But if we take that off and just kind of look at it, I think with the way that transfer quarterbacks are making those transitions, and none of them have had the experience that Sam Hartman had, I'm a little bit more confident that that's going to be a pretty smooth transition. And we've seen it at Notre Dame. We saw what Jack Cohn did 2 years ago as a transfer with not the same weapons around him that Sam Hartman will have when you look line and perimeter. Jack had some pretty darn good skill players. He had Kyron Williams, a running back. He had Kevin Austin, Michael Mayer, but the line wasn't as good as what it's going to be now. That's really the big difference. And the depth is so much better now.
Sure.
So I would put him at number 4. I'd put Jordan Travis at number 5. But there's a lot of guys in this conversation. And that's the other thing about Jordan Travis too, Ryan, is I still feel like in today's era, if you're going to go win a championship and really win a game, I don't care how dynamic you are as an athlete, I still believe you have to be able to make plays from the pocket. And my thing about Jordan Travis is I'm still not 100% sold that against a good defense, he can go out there and just make plays for 4 quarters from the pocket. I'm still not sold on that. I think we saw that against Clemson last year. I think Florida was another one of those games where they benefited from the fact that Florida wasn't that good, but against a better team than Florida, his pass game misses would have been more detrimental. That's kind of where I'm still at with him. And that was a concern for me for Sam Hartman until last year, to be completely honest with you, was, okay, yeah, he put up good numbers, but look what happened when he played Clemson. Look what happened when he played Pitt in the ACC title game. Look what happened when he played Wisconsin in the bowl game, like really good defenses. And I think last year he answered some of those concerns for me in that regard. So that's where I'm going to go there. So I do think Sam Hartman's in that conversation. I think that there's other people that are going to have him more top 10 than top 5. I think that's fair as well. I mean, there's the margin behind number 1 and 2 to me. It's not that great between 3, Michael Penix, and like 8 or 9, especially if you're going to take past seasons. And like some people are going to have Jaden Daniels as a top 5 quarterback. Now, some LSU fans may not, because there's people in LSU I've seen on, well, of course, I should clarify, LSU Twitter, and Twitter's a different animal than other real life things. There's people that think the backup kid Nussmeier should be the starter. Right?
I saw a lot of that in the bowl game, man. A lot of them were like, oh, just play Nussmeier, man. Just play Nussmeier. I'm like, man, that's wild, man. Jaden Daniels had a pretty dang good season for you guys, man. That's wild.
You've got guys like Bo Nix, who had a darn good. I mean, he even made you a believer to a degree last season. I said to a degree.
Or a bow lever.
Ryan. Oh, very well played, Mr. Roberts. for you to say anything kind about Bo Nix is him somewhat making you a believer. So
That's fair. That's fair.
Anything nice about him, he's in that conversation. You're going to see the people that overhype Grayson McCall and put him in it. He doesn't belong in the top 10 conversation for me. I'm just not a big Grayson McCall guy. You know that, and I'm very curious to see what happens now that he's lost some of those weapons and the coach that he had. You're going to see people talk about JJ McCarthy being in that conversation. He's not there yet for me. He's still the game manager for me. The guy that I love, Ryan, I'm very high on KJ Jefferson. And we saw what happened to Arkansas last year when KJ got knocked out. They were a completely different team. They have a win over LSU, in my opinion, if he plays in that game.
Oh, man. Yeah, because that Hornsby kid couldn't hit water. Yes. He thought out of a boat that day, man. Like, it was not great.
Then he got knocked out, and their third-string quarterback wasn't any better. And then there's some, Spencer Saunders. How does he play now? Because he was a guy that, to start the year, he was playing extremely well.
Yeah,
I think it's a little banged up. The team kind of falters, and he couldn't do anything to kind of get him out of that tailspin at the end of the year. He transfers to Ole Miss, which has been a place where quarterbacks go to thrive. I mean, guys just put up really good numbers there. You look at Devin Leary at Kentucky. Yep. How's he going to be? He was a guy that last year, Ryan, you and I had in the top 5. Like last season at NC State, you and I projected him to be a top 5 quarterback.
Oh, his 2021 season was bananas, man. He had a great year. He had a great year.
Oh, he was excellent, Ryan. I mean, you look at the numbers, and I'm going to pull up his numbers real quick. I mean, he had a really good year.
Like,
he was banged up last year. He had
what was it, like 35-5, right?
35-5, yeah. 35 touchdowns, crazy. 5 picks. He had 3,433 yards. Had added 2 more touchdowns. He's not a runner, but he added 2 more red zone touchdowns, completed 65.7% of his passes, which was up 5.7% from the year before when he only played 4 games. And this has kind of been the big knock on Devin Leary, is being able to stay healthy. Last year, even before he got hurt, he wasn't playing good football. So the reason I can't justify putting Devin Leary in there this year is he had an arm injury.
Yeah.
And that always concerns me with a quarterback. And number 2 is we've seen a lot more not 2021 type of play from Devin Leary than we've seen from others. Same thing with Phil Dracovic. Like, if you could take best 5 games that all the quarterbacks in college football have played and you put Phil Dracovic's best 5 games, like, that guy's a top 10 quarterback. But then there's a lot of other games you're just like, no. And he doesn't belong in there. But how does he do at Pitt? He's going to have better supporting cast up front, mainly. The coordinator that he did so well with at BC is now his coordinator again at Pitt. Him and John McNulty did not click for whatever. I'm not saying not click personality-wise, but McNulty's offense with Phil's style of play, that offense looked better with him and Moorhead in it because he's more of like what McNulty was looking for. How does he bounce back as a top 10 quarterback? Riley Leonard's a guy at Duke that I am really looking forward to seeing how he kind of emerges this year.
That's my breakout star in college football this year, I think, is Riley Leonard, man. Like, you saw a lot of it this year. I mean, he threw like 20-something touchdowns. I think only like 6 or 7 interceptions, somewhere in that ballpark. But he also runs the ball, man. He ran for like over 700 yards last year.
He was 699 and 13 touchdowns.
Yeah, man. So, I mean, when you're talking about a dual threat quarterback, I mean, that kid, I think in year 2 as this full-time starter, I mean, that kid was a little bit of his backstory was pretty cool, Brian. He actually was on pace to being a college basketball player before he kind of fully put his mind on football. So his uncle and his dad both played college basketball. He thought he was going to be a college basketball player. Then COVID hit, wasn't able to get the basketball looks as much. So he went to play football, man. And he's developed. And yeah, so I think that he has a chance to be a really, really good player.
And here's the thing. Do you know who had more total yards of offense last year between Riley Leonard and Jordan Travis? Obviously, the way I'm asking the question gives the answer away. But it was
Riley Leonard.
He averaged more yards per game last year.
Yeah.
He also had more total touchdowns. He had 33 total touchdowns, whereas Jordan Travis last year had 31. And so you look at it, Ryan. You're saying, boy, there's some good quarterbacks. The ACC's got a chance to have some really good quarterback play this year. We obviously mentioned Drake May already. We obviously mentioned just Jordan Travis, Riley Leonard. You've got some transfers coming in. Obviously, Phil Dracovic still in the ACC, going from one conference to another. And there's some
Brennan Armstrong
going to NC State. And again, he's another guy like Dracovic that had a new coordinator last year, didn't mesh with him. He's now back at a new school with a former coordinator with who he had all that success with. Obviously, Robert Anae, who was at Syracuse last year and made Garrett Schrader look competent. last season, which tells you the kind of quarterback coach he is. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting. But I think right now, when you look at Sam Hartman, there's guys behind him that have better physical tools.
Sure.
But the proven production is there, and the ability to show that he can run an offense at a high level and elevate those around him. That's another thing for me that Sam Hartman showed in the film because Ryan, you know this, when they first started looking at Sam Hartman, and I wasn't in love with the idea. I wasn't, because I'd watched the slow mesh and I'd watched a couple of the games where he threw a bunch of picks, and I'm just like, is he really that guy? But then you dive into the film, and the more film I watched over the last 3 years, the more you're like, yeah, okay, I get it. This guy's got a lot of ability. So I think he can. And here's the thing that you start talking about. Well, what does that mean for Notre Dame? Notre Dame just went 9-4 this past season. Should have won 2 of the games they lost. And we're competitive in the other 2 losses. I mean, they lost to USC and Ohio State by 11, but Notre Dame was competitive in both of those, especially the Ohio State game. And they did that with a quarterback that I would argue wasn't a top 50 quarterback in the nation. Now, people say, oh, it was QB rating. That's because they protected him all year.
Yeah.
Right? They never put him in bad spots. And that's not a shot at Drew Pine. I mean, he was thrust into a tough situation last season. But the fact is that the quarterback play last year was, not top 50.
Sporadic.
At best.
Yeah.
And now you go into a situation, Ryan, where you've got a guy that's at minimum a top 10 quarterback. Nobody disagrees that he's a top 10 quarterback.
I don't think so.
And you're arguing top 5. And so I think that speaks volumes about the kind of player that Sam Hartman is and what he could do for Notre Dame. I think that's where a lot of the excitement about this, because, if you're concerned about Notre Dame going 9-4 again, well, why? They return almost everyone from last year's team. And the two of the losses were big, but Jared Patterson is a good football player, but he's not irreplaceable, especially the way he played most of last season. I look at defense. Isaiah Foskey's a big loss, but he's replaceable. Jason Adamiola, I would not be shocked after breaking down film. I've been breaking down a lot of 22 film, Ryan. I would not be shocked if Riley Mills is better this season. Howard Cross is back. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, it would not shock me if his production as a big end is better than what Riley Mills and the other big ends gave last year.
Yep.
And then after that, everybody else is back. And so, okay, well, you went 9-4. Can you do better? Well, you flip your big games. 2 of your 3 were on the road last year. Now this year, 2 of the 3 are at home.
Yep.
2 of those 3 teams have new quarterbacks, as you mentioned. And now you have a top 10 national quarterback on your roster.
Should have a chance.
So that's why I was on a show the other day, and a guy asked me, are Notre Dame fans really fired up? And I was like, surprisingly, not really.
Not yet.
And he asked me why, and I said, well, part of it is I think the way the offseason went, with just the Ludwig situation and just, get turned down by Matt Luke, and there just was a lot of negative energy.
It was a very exhausting offseason is how I put it. It was a little exhausting. It was.
Yeah, the recruiting misses and just a lot of negativity that people are kind of grabbing onto while ignoring all the good things that are happening and the good things that have happened this offseason. And, so some it's like, here's a question that somebody, who would you rather have in 2023? Keon Keeley, Peyton Bowen, or Sam Hartman?
Oh, Sam Hartman.
Right, there you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's something to be excited about. And you're talking to 2 guys who think that Keon Keeley and Peyton Bowen are 5-star players.
Yes.
No question.
And Keon Keeley
is the number 1 player in the country.
Keon Keeley was the best player in the 2023 class. He would also be the best player in the 2024 class. That's
a good point.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a good point. And he was special. But the point is like, and I think the other thing too is like the Notre Dame fans, we've been down this road before, right? For 30 plus years, this is the year, and then you get the rug pulled out from underneath you. And I think they're at the point now where it's kind of like Notre Dame fans have adopted this, I'm going to prepare for the worst and hope for the best mentality.
Yep.
And my thing is, it's okay to be excited this time of the year. That's just what being a fan is all about. But I understand it. I do this isn't me criticizing Notre Dame fans. I get it. No. Because if I was in your shoes, I would feel the same exact way. But I think when you start zeroing, I think once fans really get a chance to see Sam Hartman running this offense, and I'm not even talking about the blue gold game, although it may happen. I mean, I don't know what the blue gold game is going to look like. I have no clue.
Sure.
But once you see the Navy game and the Tennessee State and then NC State, I think that's when you'll start to really say people will be believers, because there's a lot of people that didn't watch a lot of Sam Hartman at Wake Forest. Let's be honest.
Yep.
And that's fine. I get it. Who's sitting there saying, I got to really turn on this NC State Wake Forest game today? There's not a lot of people doing that. So I do understand it, but I think that's where a lot of my excitement comes from. And the other part of it is, if for some reason Sam Hartman's not starting, as long as it's not injury related, it means someone even better is beating him out. So, Ryan, that's where a lot of my excitement comes from, because we've complained for years about Notre Dame quarterback play is this and quarterback play is that. Well, you've got a top 10 national quarterback at quarterback for Notre Dame, and it's like nobody's really talking about that right now.
Yeah. It is bizarre, man. It really is. I mean, but again, I get it, right? Like, I think someone just said BK PTSD in the chat again, but like, I have been hurt before. I understand,
PTSD,
right? Like
Davey PTSD, Weiss PTSD.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not just BK, man. It's
right.
Early 2000s to where we are PTSD, right? Like, that's where we are. I should say late 90s, right? Even leading into the 2000s. Like, It's been a long time. We understand that, right? At the end of the day, though, Sam Hartman's very good. He's been very good, right? What is it exactly going to look like at Notre Dame? I have an idea. I don't know for sure. So it's an unknown. So I understand that people need to kind of wait and see what it looks like the first couple of games. And then it's really going to start to ramp up that excitement, right? But I've said this before, and I just want us to be prepared for this. If it is really good, let's make sure we're enjoying that it's really good when that happens, right?
I want more fans to be like my guy Jay Wick here. I'm prepared for the great 11-1 and preparing for the best 12-0. I said what I said.
Yes, that's it, man.
It's the quarterback. But see, now let's dive into it though, Ryan. Okay, sounds great. I think here's another part of it, and you even said this in your decision on why you'd rank him 5th instead of 4th. There is a level of unknown. Is he going to be able to get on the same page with the Notre Dame receivers the way that he was with A.T. Perry? And will he be able to master the Notre Dame offense like he did at Wake? Because the reality is, Ryan, the season he had at Wake Forest 2 years ago, when he threw for over 4,200 yards and accounted for 50 touchdowns in a Power 5 conference, he'd been in that offense. That was his 4th year in that offense. He'd had the same offensive coordinator his entire career. He had been working with A.T. Perry for a couple of years and a lot of those receivers for a couple of years. I mean, he knew those guys. At Notre Dame, it's all different. It's new system, new coaches, new players, new teammates, new environment, new weather. It's all different.
Yep.
Now, part of me says, but let's not forget that a quarter of his schedule is against the same teams he played at when he was at Wake Forest.
So there's familiarity there.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yep.
There is some familiarity both ways, but he's going to know their defense is most likely a lot more than they're going to know his.
Yep.
And when you look at kind of the production he had last season, there were some up and down moments against those teams. He had a great game against Clemson. He had a really productive game against Duke. He didn't play that great against NC State or Louisville. So, I mean, I get all those things. We can spin it all types of different ways. But I think the fact of the matter is that when Sam Hartman goes to play those teams, he's going to have a far greater supporting cast around him than he ever had at Wake Forest as an entire team.
Notre Dame fans, they need to just go watch the Clemson game last year, man. And even though Wake Forest lost, just go watch Sam Hartman. I mean, Sam Hartman kept them in that football game, man. He was the reason that they almost won that game. I had some initial reaction to Sam Hartman when he first was on the Notre Dame radar, as well as you did, Brian. That you kind of talked about a little bit. But if you want to get sold on Sam Hartman quick, turn on that game, man. I mean, he's throwing bombs everywhere out there, man. And it is well-placed footballs. He's staying firm in the pocket. Like, there's a lot to like about Sam. So, again, I understand being tentative with it. You want to kind of just let it ease in. I understand. But, again, just enjoy it when it happens. That's all I'm asking. Just enjoy it when it happens.
So let's dive into this, Ryan. Let's kind of get into part 2 of this conversation, which is, so what does Sam Hartman need to do to be the kind of quarterback Notre Dame needs to be a title contender? Now, we don't know if they'll be a title contender at other positions, but he can only kind of handle what he does.
Yep.
What are the things that you look at and say, okay, he needs to do A, B, C, and D? There's the obvious things like, okay, mesh with the players, become a leader, buy into the system, learn the system, and all that. But when you really get down to it, as we dive into what does it need to look like, partly statistically, but the level of play that leads to the statistics, Ryan, what are some of the things that as we dive into this, we need to see from Sam Hartman next season to say, okay, that guy's going to play. That guy's playing well enough. That guy's doing what he needs to do for Notre Dame to at least offensively be a championship caliber football team, because the run game's going to be there, especially if he plays that way. There is some talent there. What does he need to do, in my opinion?
I would say for me, Brian, the one big thing, and this is going to sound like weird to some people, I'm sure, but I don't want him to feel like he can't take chances, right? Like, I don't want him to feel like he has to be super perfect and be very careful with the football. Of course, you have to be careful with the football, right? You're a quarterback. You're not supposed to turn the football over. But the best parts of what Sam Hartman did at Wake Forest, in my opinion, is his ability to push the ball down the field, man, to push it vertically, create explosive plays. And that's been one thing that Notre Dame has been missing as a passing game and just as an offense in general over the last couple of years, creating explosive plays. So I don't think this is going to happen. So I'm not really worried about this too much, right? That the offensive staff is going to be like, no, you need to rein it in, brother. Rein it in. Just be a facilitator. Just get the ball where it needs to be. I need to see Sam Hartman take some chances, right? And I think we need to be prepared that once in a while it might lead to a turnover.
Right.
But more often than not, historically it has shown that when Sam Hartman puts the ball out there and takes chances, a lot of great things happen. So I think that the key for me from an offensive perspective and from a Sam Hartman perspective is if he's being aggressive and he's taking some chances and he's pushing the football, that's what Notre Dame needs, man. They need that recipe of being able to create explosive plays. They have not had that the last couple of years.
Right. And I think the other thing too, and this is what I've said before, when you break down Sam Hartman's film, you start to say, okay, I don't get as worried about the turnovers as I might otherwise. And so I'll give you a couple examples. So when I first looked at the NC State film, I was like, well, that's concerning, because Notre Dame plays NC State at NC State. Sam threw 3 picks in that game. When you break them down, the first one was a bad pick. He just didn't see a guy undercut a deep shot, and he picked him off. The second one was taking a shot downfield on 4th and 11. They dropped 8. There's nobody. Right. There's nobody open. He takes a shot about 30 yards downfield, 25 yards downfield, gets picked off. The last one was they're running a go route, and as Sam cocks to throw, A.T. Perry, who's pushing – the corner is playing off and outside. A.T. was in the reduced alignment. So A.T. starts to push him outside, and Sam – and he's attacking the outside shoulder. Sam throws the ball up and outside. He's going to give A.T. a chance to back shoulder it. Well, A.T., as soon as the ball gets here, cuts inside. And he throws the ball to the corner, and you're like, what the heck kind of throw was that? Well, if you break down the play, you're like, the receiver can't do that. You can't cut inside that late in a route because your quarterback's going to be thinking you're going somewhere else. You see more of that stuff, but he's got to eliminate some of the things where he tried to – there's taking a shot, and then there's forcing the ball unnecessarily into triple coverage. And those are a couple of the throws he's got to fix. But you got to be careful not to fix it, Ryan. To your point, I think you nailed it. You can't, quote unquote, fix it to the degree where you now start to get him unwilling to take those chances.
Overcorrections.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was an issue for Notre Dame for a long time. Brian Kelly's quarterbacks became so turnover averse that they just wouldn't make plays. I've had people say that's really what happened to Ian Book. It's not. Ian Book can read a defense. I think it was a combination of both. I don't think he's very good at reading defenses, and I don't think he was willing to turn the ball over. And because they didn't want to deal with BK on the sideline coming back. So I think that's part of it. I think the thing I want to see is just kind of be you. What does that look like?
Yes.
Take your shots down the field. Be willing to throw it up and give your receivers. I mean, there's been 5 or 6 balls that we've seen, some in person, some in the highlights, where you're like, he just threw the ball up. Exactly. That's college football. You got a 6'5" mountain out there, 6'4" mountain on the other side. And not everything has to be, West Coast Joe Montana hitting Jerry Rice in stride when he's open by 4 yards. Sometimes it's like, dude, you got a one-on-one. Give your guy, your dude's 5 inches taller than that guy. He's better than that guy. Throw it up and give him a chance to make a play. I want to see a lot of that.
Sam Hartman has a chance to change the narrative this year, Brian. Like, if he gives those guys some opportunities to catch the football, and Deion Colzie and Tobias and those cats make some of those catches, man, all of a sudden people are going to be like, oh, wait, maybe Notre Dame has had talent at receiver. Maybe they actually have maybe they have some talent, some dudes that can make some catches. Like, that's yes, there's a misnomer that's been thrown out there that I think can change this year with Sam.
decision making is going to be big. I think leadership is going to be important. I love the relationship that I have heard behind the scene. I mean, Notre Dame's players say things publicly because they're smart and they know that they need to put forth their best foot.
Yeah.
And a quarterback's not going to come out and say, I can't stand that dude. I mean, he should have been brought here. I should have won this job. This should be my job. They're not going to do that. So publicly, I don't really care. But what I'm hearing privately with sources is the same thing I'm hearing publicly, Ryan, which is like Sam Hartman and the quarterbacks have really, really bonded. Like there's a level of leadership and respect there where he didn't come in and, hey, I'm big time. I'm so-and-so. I'm 19th all time in passing yards and 18th all time in passing touchdowns in college football history. And, here, hold my clipboard.
I was on QB1 in high school.
Right.
Yeah, right.
No,
Exactly.
He came in and worked. He's humble. He's quiet. He's got some confidence about him, which is good, but he's also not a jerk, and that can be the case with quarterbacks, especially ones that produce like him. I mean, he's passed for more yards in college football than in more touchdowns than any Notre Dame quarterback in history, and it's not that close. He's over 1,000 yards more than Brady Quinn. He's it wasn't Ryan. It was like 15 or so more touchdowns than what Brady Quinn had.
It's 15, 110 to 95. Yeah. Yep.
So it's a prolific dude, right? And so he's got to play that. He's got to play that way. I think another thing too is with Sam Hartman is there's the ins and outs of, okay, be accurate, be a good decision maker, don't turn the ball over, take chances, things like that, Ryan. But there's also the bigger picture stuff. And this to me is the greatest unknown with Sam Hartman. Yes, he played very well against Clemson last year, but he hasn't played great in big games in his career at Wake. And I'll get into why I think that's the case, but the reality is, whatever the reason is, whatever the excuse or justification or rationalization for it is, the fact is he just hasn't played well in big games. Now, it's not true in all of them. I mean, I think playing at Florida State last year when Florida State was undefeated is a pretty big game. I would argue that. I mean, Florida State was 4-0. They had just beaten LSU. They had beaten Louisville on the road. They just blew out Wake Forest. They were playing very well. And then Wake had to go to Florida State, and he played very well in that game. And they were coming off that big loss to Clemson where he played very well. But then he doesn't really play well at NC State, and that was a pretty big game. And then you go to I thought the bowl game he played very well. Then you go to the year before, doesn't play very well against NC State, doesn't play very well against Clemson, doesn't play very well in the ACC title game. Similar story in the previous year, didn't play very well against Wisconsin, didn't play very well against NC State. 2019, same deal. Doesn't play very well against Clemson. Actually, it was 2018 that he didn't play well against Clemson. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, it's 2018. He was pretty bad against Clemson in a blowout loss. Him and Jamie Newman were both pretty terrible. There's been some games where he's played well, but there's also been a lot of big games he didn't play well. He's got to play well in those big games because I don't care about, what he does against Navy and Tennessee State and Central Michigan and even Duke. You know what I mean? I don't really care as much about those games against Wake, in a rematch. I don't care. I care what he does at NC State. I care what he does against Ohio State. I care what he does against Clemson. I care what he does at I think Louisville, to me, is kind of a big game because Louisville's got a lot more talent than people realize. They just were not coached very well, in my opinion, or Scott Satterfield. To me, I would argue they have more talent top to bottom than what Duke has, even though their quarterback's not nearly as good.
Yep.
But now you've got Jeff Brom. It's a more dangerous game. Then, of course, I care what you do against Clemson. Pitt, to me, is one, but that's a home game. And then, of course, what you do in the postseason. Those are the games where we need Sam Hartman to play good football, good to great football. That, to me, is the biggest unknown with him right now, is what he's going to do then. Because why didn't he play well in those games? Well, and here's a big thing for him at Notre Dame. Sam Hartman needs to be a bit of a gunslinger at Notre Dame, but he has to do it. Here's the best thing the Notre Dame coaches could do is to not focus on turnovers, but focus on you don't have to carry us.
Yes.
That's the biggest difference. At Wake, if Sam didn't play great, they don't win. I mean, they're not beating good teams if Sam doesn't play really good football. At Notre Dame, he doesn't need to do that. It's just run the offense. When the chances are there, take them. You don't have to throw that ball into triple coverage because on 2nd and 9, because we can come back the next play and take another shot. And if we have to punt, we got a pretty darn good defense, especially related to what you had at Wake Forest. You're going to be okay, right? And so I think those are things that I look at, Ryan, and I say that to me is a big thing. And when you get into those big games, it's like I know I got to score 40. Every time they played North Carolina, Sam Hartman had to go into that game with the thought process of we got to score 40 or we can't win. And they scored – look at last year, right? They scored 34 points on the road against Wake Forest. And Sam Hartman throws for 4 touchdowns, 320 yards. He averages 10.3 yards per attempt, and they lost.
Well, Brian, I would say it's going to be 2 different definitions of hero, where he's been and where he's at now, right? Hero at Wake Forest is that you need to play hero ball because we have no other way of winning games because our running game isn't very good, our offensive line is below average, and our defense is spotty, right? For Sam Hartman and for Wake Forest to win games at Wake Forest, he had to be the hero. He had to make all the plays. At Notre Dame, you're measured by being a hero as winning football games, man. So at the end of the day, the wins matter most when you're at a place like Notre Dame. The numbers will come, as always. But to your point, if Sam Hartman has solid game against Duke and they win, right? Like a solid game against Pittsburgh and they win, but he actually torches Clemson and torches USC in victories and they get to a playoff game, is anybody going to be like, oh, he didn't put up as good in numbers as he did at Wake Forest? Like, no one cares. They care about the big moments is when, right? We've seen quarterbacks play well at times, in Notre Dame in recent years. Like Ian Book had some really nice moments, but it was the big games, right? Like we get back to this big game conversation. What can Sam do when he's against the Clemsons, against the Ohio States, against the USCs, making a playoff run? That's what's going to cement how successful the season is for him. And it's tough, honestly. I mean, that's not for the faint of heart, right? Like to be a quarterback at this level, you need to have some moxie to you, man. You need to be tough. You need to be mentally and physically tough and durable dude. And I hope Sam can be that guy, man, because Notre Dame needs him. They need him. But again, he's going to be – I always talk about those pillar games, right? In those pillars, when does the best Sam Hartman come out? Is it during those games or is it against Tennessee State? That's when the biggest conversation piece needs to be. And that's what he has a chance to show this year is that he can be that guy on the biggest stage, in the biggest game, and not have to do everything himself. Just do the job and get victories that Notre Dame hasn't been accustomed to winning enough over the past few years. You're on mute, Brian.
Yep, because I was on a different page, so I didn't see you give me the signal.
No worries, man. You're good.
It's such a different animal for him too, Ryan. And that's going to be the hardest thing is changing his mindset. I think you just nailed it. Can he change his mindset? I'm going to give you some more examples of what I'm talking about here, right? So you talk about Sam Hartman. Last year, they scored 37 points in a game. He throws for 325 yards, 3 touchdowns, and they win by a point. The next week, they go on the road. He throws for 337 yards and 6 touchdowns, and they lose because they gave up 51 points. They gave up 48 points to Louisville. They gave up 30 to NC State. They lost a game where he threw 397 yards and 2 touchdowns. North Carolina, I mentioned that one already. They lost to Duke in a game where he threw for 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, and they had 31 points. You go to the year before, the 3 games they lost, they went 11-3. The 3 games they lost, they gave up 58 points, 48 points, and 45 points. Against North Carolina again that year, he throws for 398 yards and 5 touchdowns, and they lose 58-55. He throws for 312 yards and a touchdown against Clemson. They lose 48-27. Other games they won. He threw for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns, and they beat NC State 45-42. He threw for 458 yards and 5 touchdowns against Army. They scored 70 points, and they needed every bit of that because Army scored 56. Goes on the road, and they play Syracuse. They win 40-37 in the game. He throws for 330 yards and 3 touchdowns. If he doesn't do that, Louisville, 324 yards, 2 touchdowns. They win 37-34. If he doesn't play that well, they don't win. The year before, 2020, he throws for 429 yards, 4 touchdowns, no turnovers against North Carolina. His team scores 53 points. And they lost. And back-to-back years, Sam Hartman led Wake Forest to over 50 points against North Carolina, and they lost both games.
Yep.
Right? They're scoring about 50 points per game in 3 years against North Carolina, and they're 0-3. It's not happening in Notre Dame. It's not happening. And so that's the difference is you don't need to be that guy. We don't need you to throw for 4,200 yards at Notre Dame. We don't. You don't. That's what the coaches do. He doesn't need to score 50 touchdowns for Notre Dame to be a great championship team this year. It's not so much now. If he does, that's great. If it comes and he has 50 touchdowns and
he'll probably win a Heisman if he has 50 touchdowns at Notre Dame.
Interceptions, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ryan. And if he puts up the numbers at Notre Dame that he put up at Wake Forest 2 years ago, Sam Hartman's a Heisman winner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if he does what he did last year, as long as Notre Dame is 11-1, he's probably a finalist for 3,700 yards, 38 touchdowns. So he's probably a Heisman finalist if he does that. And that's just kind of the thing you look at, Ryan, and you say, boy, this guy's got a chance to be a pretty darn good football player. I mean, you look at Caleb Williams last year, Ryan. He had 52 touchdowns and wins the Heisman running away. He had 4,800 yards.
Yep.
That's pretty darn good, right? I mean, say it's pretty great. Well, Sam Hartman had 4,500 yards and 50 touchdowns the year before at Wake Forest. Nobody talked about. He wasn't a Heisman finalist. He would have been if he put those numbers up at Notre Dame. And so, real quick, so people understand, when we say 50 touchdowns, we're not talking about passing touchdowns. He had 39 passing and 11 rushing. It's 50 total touchdowns, just so people are clear of what we're talking about here. There's no way he's throwing 50 touchdowns. He had 11 rushing in 2021. That's what we're referring to. And I can see him having 6 or 7 rushing touchdowns this year because it's going to be pulling the ball at the 5 and walking into the end zone. When teams are trying to take away Logan Diggs and those guys. So, that's kind of where I'm at in that regard, Ryan, is he doesn't need to put up those numbers. He needs to just run the offense, make plays when they need him to make plays, but be on your game against those teams. And being on your game doesn't mean you got to go on the road against Clemson and throw for 400 yards. It could mean throwing for 250. But what you need to be is accurate, good on third down, and when the plays are there for you to make a play down the field, you got to make that play down the field.
You got to be money, man. Got to be money, right? Like those are the biggest moments. I mean, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not, and I don't think everyone can admit this to themselves, we judge quarterbacks based upon them winning, right? Them winning those big games, what they play in those big moments, because those things matter, right? Like because what is it, a quarterback, Brian? He is inherently the leader of a football team, no matter if he is ready or he is, right? And Sam Hartman, if he is the starting quarterback at Notre Dame, he is going to be the absolute leader of Notre Dame. That's who everyone's going to look to. And when there is a tough moments, when they're not playing incredibly well, when they're struggling a little bit, when they look a little bit sluggish, when they're in a close football game, who's everyone going to look to? They're not going to look to Audric Estime. They're not going to look to Joe Walt. Who are they going to look to? They're going to look at Sam Hartman. And we need to understand that. And with that, it's like that Spider-Man movie, right? With power becomes great responsibility, right? Like that's what we're looking at.
Power comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah. And that's what he has, and that's what he has to prove. But at the end of the day, he is going to be judged based upon his biggest moments and those biggest football games, because that's what Notre Dame has been missing.
What was the best play Ian Book ever made in his career?
To me, it was the Clemson.
Oh, that's the biggest mistake he ever made. The best. Oh no, I would argue the biggest play he ever made to me was actually because the bigger play in that game to me was 2 plays later when he threw the touchdown pass to Avery Davis. The biggest play he made to me, because if he doesn't make it, I don't think he is the starter the next year, was the late touchdown against LSU.
Yeah,
and the thing about that play is, by a read, that probably should not have been. That probably was not necessarily a great read. There's 2 guys out there. But what Ian did was he said, you know what? We need a play to be made, and I'm going to give Miles Boykin a chance to make it.
Yep.
And Ian put it up, and Miles made it. Now, so you're taking a shot at the quarterback. No, I'm not. That's part of being a great quarterback, is sometimes saying, I got to give my guy a shot to go make a play on the ball. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And that's what Ian did. And that wins in the game. Because my point is, if they lose that game, Ryan, and he doesn't lead them back to a victory, then they're just not there. They're just not. He's not the starting quarterback anymore. And so I look at it and say, but it was just about him saying, you know what? that was the loosest we've ever seen Ian Book play as well. And that's the thing is Sam's just got to play loose. You make a mistake, don't sweat it. And I'm not worried about that, to be honest with you, Ryan, because he's been there. He's been there so long. I don't see that being an issue. I don't think he's going to have a problem with playing loose. I'm not concerned about that.
Yeah. I mean, that's how he's played his whole career. So like, I would hope that the tightness doesn't start now, right? Like that's kind of how he's been his entire career. So that's what you kind of expect.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we want to see from Sam Hartman. He's just got to play that way. Play well in the big games. That's something that, people love talk about Ian Book. And so why don't you like Ian Book? I'm like, look what Ian Book did his entire career, every big game they played in. He had one game in a big moment where I thought he played well, and that was against Clemson. And even in that game, he was really bad in the middle of the game. He's great at the beginning, great at the end, and he deserves credit for that. But his play, including his fumble, is kind of what allowed Clemson to get back into the game. He did step up when they needed it. But you're judged as a quarterback at Notre Dame based on the big games you win. You say, why don't you respect Ian Book all-time winningest quarterback? He had 5 wins over ranked teams his entire career. Tony Rice had 7 in 1989 alone. That's what a quarterback at Notre Dame should be evaluated on. Why do people not like Jimmy Clausen? Didn't win. Jimmy Clausen was a great passer at Notre Dame. Great passer. Why don't people view him as a big-time quarterback? Didn't win. Ian Book won against a bunch of teams that you're supposed to beat, didn't have the big wins, 5-5 against ranked teams. Sam Hartman will be judged on how he plays in the big games. I don't care if Notre Dame goes 11-1 next year, or 10-2 next year. If they're 2-3 in the big games and he doesn't play well in those games, then it doesn't matter. They could go 12-0. And if he doesn't play one of those big games, it's like, yeah, he's part of a very good football team. And he did what he needed to do. You got to play one of those big games. That's why the legends are the legends. If Vince Young has the historic season he has, but then doesn't cap it off with the game that he had against USC, are we talking about how great of a 2005 season he had? No.
He didn't even win the Heisman that year, right? Like you forget about him. You forget about him.
But we all remember what he did that year, right? Because he did in the title game what he did all year, which is play great in big moments and put up numbers. Yep. And that's kind of where I want to see Sam Hartman this year. And he's going to have to be that way because I think that I'll make 2 claims, Ryan, and I want to get your immediate opinion of them. Number 1, Notre Dame's roster is much better than a lot of people, including Notre Dame fans, think it is talent-wise.
Yeah.
Number 2, it's not as good as Bama and Georgia's. And in some spots, not as good as Ohio State's. It's better than Ohio State's in other spots. Ohio State's is better than others. But the top 2 teams that you're all still chasing for a national title, their roster's not better. They need that type of quarterback, that kind of impact quarterback to win that game, unless that other team just has a bad game. That happens. Sure. Bama in 2018 against Clemson was the better team. There's no question. That was one of the best teams of the last 20 years. 18 Clemson and 19 LSU were 2 of the best teams of the last 20, 30 years, in my opinion. But Bama also had a bad night. It was a bad combination. That's why they got blown out. If they played again the next week, I think Clemson still wins. I just think it's a much more competitive game.
Sure.
That's what I think. So sometimes that stuff happens. But if to go beat them where you're outplaying them, they need that type of play. They can't somebody asked me why we were talking about Georgia when we were having the show the other day. And they said, well, how do you not have Stetson Bennett in the elite championship driving category? I said, because if you put Stetson Bennett at Notre Dame, does Notre Dame win a championship last year? Answer is no. You give Notre Dame Clemson's offensive line and defensive line and Stetson Bennett, now we're cooking, right? And that's kind of my point is they can win with Jacob Coker. Bama can win with Jacob Coker. Notre Dame can't. Bama can go to the playoff with Blake Sims. Notre Dame can't. Georgia can win 2 titles with Stetson Bennett. Notre Dame can't. And that's why it's important that Sam Hartman be that guy, in my opinion.
It's the separator, right? Like it's the difference maker. It's when everything is equal, quarterback is usually the difference. But also we don't talk about enough that when there is a deficiency or when you are playing against a better football team, quarterbacks can close that gap, man. Like, is there a bigger gap closer than a quarterback? Like, is there a bigger one in sports? Like, I'm not talking about football. Is there a bigger gap closer than in sports than the quarterback position? That can be the difference between winning and losing a football game. It can be. And because those guys, the great ones, usually make the biggest play of the game when it matters most. That's usually when it happens, right? So I agree with you. I 100% agree with you because Notre Dame is not going to be a more talented football team than Georgia this year. They're not. They don't have the depth of what Georgia has. They don't. But if they go into that football game and if they play in, like, let's say in one of the playoff games this year, and Carson Beck is just a solid player and Sam Hartman's a baller, well, Notre Dame might have a shot there, man, because they have the biggest advantage at the most important position in sports. So that can be the separator. That can be the difference. So, yeah, I don't think it's definitely not outrageous. Like, yes, they are better than most people think they are. 100% agree. They're not quite as good as Georgia or Bama. And and there's nothing wrong with that. We can be honest with ourselves and still say, but it doesn't mean they don't have a chance to win, right? They still have a chance. You don't have the best team does not always win, everyone. Like that's a fact. They don't always win. They do most of the time. They don't always win. The difference can be the quarterback position. And hopefully that's what Sam Hartman can bring. Hopefully.
That's right. So, Ryan, I think we cleared that up. I think that's kind of where they need to be at quarterback.
Yep.
Now the question is how good is the supporting cast going to be at Wake Forest? It's going to be, or at Notre Dame. It's going to be better than what it was at Wake Forest, but it will be good enough. Because, like I said, Sam Hartman is going to be a very key ingredient to winning a title, but he is not the guy that can put a team on his shoulders the way that Trevor Lawrence did against Ohio State in the semifinals in 2019.
Yep.
He's not that guy. The way that Joe Burrow could by just ripping you apart, and if you did too much, he could tuck it and run and make a play. He's not that guy, in my opinion. And so you have to have receivers step up and make plays, because if Sam Hartman's throwing the ball up and giving guys a chance and they're not making the plays, then it doesn't matter how good he is. And the reason is because he's not going to go out there. And the reason I say about Trevor Lawrence thing is because I think Sam Hartman could go out into a game and just rip a team up with his arm. But in that game, if you remember, Ohio State had a great secondary that year, and they were beating the Clemson receivers up just the whole game. And they couldn't throw the football. And so the game started to turn when Trevor starts making plays with his legs. He ended up rushing for 100 yards that game, which then opened up some opportunities for them to finally go make some plays later. And so that's not something I think you're going to see Sam Hartman do on that stage. He may be able to do it to NC State or Central Michigan because he's had some games where he's made plays with his legs. But it's not happening against Georgia. It's not happening against Ohio State in the playoff. It's not going to happen against 2018 version of Clemson. It's not going to happen against Alabama. And that's the point. You've got to have the talent around him to step up. And so you look at the receiving core, and the question that we ask is, do they need an alpha? And can there be one on this team? Last year when we had this conversation, Ryan, the answer was no, they don't need an alpha at wide receiver. Well, why do you say that? Because they already have an alpha. He just plays tight end. And to me, I don't think there's a tight end on the roster that can beat Brock Bowers. Like Georgia didn't have an alpha receiver last year, but they had an alpha in the pass game. His name was Brock Bowers. Notre Dame doesn't have that at tight end this year. And I think the tight end position is going to be very good, but it's not that. It's not that. There's no Brock Bowers on the roster. There's no Michael Mayer on the roster. Maybe there's a Cole Kmet. Maybe Mitchell Evans may be that guy, and that's a very good tight end. But Cole Kmet's not, who's a very good football player. He's still not Michael Mayer. And that's the conversation. Kyle Rudolph, to me, was a very good college player. He wasn't Tyler Eifert.
Sure.
Right? And there's a difference there. And so, to me, that's the question mark is, do they need an alpha? Can you be a team? Can Notre Dame? Now, you can have teams that don't have alphas and win titles. We've seen that. Ohio State didn't have an alpha in the past game in 2014. Michael Thomas wasn't at Ohio State what he was in the pros. Devin Smith was a big play guy, but he wasn't an alpha. We have seen teams win titles without alpha receivers. The question is, can Notre Dame be that team? And that's where I think the debate gets into, Ryan, is do they need an alpha for this offense to truly be good enough to compete for a championship? I don't think they need an alpha to even be a playoff team. But to be a championship team, do they need an alpha? And my answer is yes. This year at receiver, they need one.
I think that they need an alpha in big-time situations is kind of how I'll coin it. Because I do think that there's a world where Notre Dame could be really good. But again, this is that like margin for error thing we always talk about, right? It's like if you have one guy that is an absolute alpha, you don't need everybody to step up all of them, right, to be a collaborative effort as much. When you don't have an alpha, you need like multiple guys to step up and just be really good players, right? Like to be that guys that you can consistently depend on. So I do think there's a reality where you don't need an alpha, like in the traditional sense of like, that's the volume getter. That's the guy that, you know, is your number one receiver, no questions about it. But I do think that Notre Dame absolutely needs an alpha in the sense that when there's a big moment in a football game, where's the ball going? That's that guy that they need, right? Or I don't know if that's Tobias. I don't know if that's Jaden Thomas. I don't know if that's Dion. I don't know who that guy will be. But I think that you do need an alpha when it matters most in those big games, in those big moments. Because I think that personally, this offense is going to be spread out pretty well as far as volume, right? Like, sure. I think Dion's going to get his. I think Tobias is going to get his. Jane's going to have his opportunities. Lorenzo, like, I think all these guys are going to have their opportunities. I don't know if there's one guy that I look at and say he's going to have 1,000 yards and everybody else is going to have 500 or 600.
Because you're not defining alpha by being
the number
the production.
One. Yeah.
The production. And I think that's the difference is I don't think there's going to be a guy that has 75 catches for 1,200 yards.
Right.
We're not going to see one, in my opinion. I don't, again, I could be, I hope I'm wrong, actually. It'd be kind of cool if somebody stepped up like this and became that kind of guy. But we're not going to see a guy that's going to have, the kind of season that Will Fuller had in 2015, 62 catches, 1,258 yards, or even what he was in 2014, where he had 76 catches for over 1,000 yards. We're not going to see a Michael Floyd out 100 catches that year. And the year before, he had 79 catches. I just don't think Golden Tate, 93 for 1,496. I don't think we're gonna see that kind of guy. I could in certain scenarios see someone being what Chase Claypool was in 19. 66 catches, barely over 1,000 yards, 13 touchdowns. Like, it would not shock me if in 13 games Tobias Merriweather goes over 1,000 yards and he does so in the bowl game. Because if you think about it, Chase that year ended up with 1,037 yards, Ryan. Well, I mean, he didn't even have 900 going into the bowl game. He was at 891. He just had a huge game against Iowa State, not a very good bowl team, that put him over 1,000. I could see a guy having a Miles Boykin type of year, production-wise, that Miles had in 2018, where he had 59 catches for 872. Well, why was he, he had number one, but had that low production? Well, Chase Claypool had 50 for 639. Chris Fink had 49 for 571. Alize Mack had 36 for 360. Right? Like I could see something like that. What I mean by alpha is a guy that is a couple things. You mentioned one already. They need a guy, and preferably more than one guy, that can step up and be a dude in big moments.
Yep.
And that's what I've always said that separates Will Fuller from some of the other receivers that he's matched up against is Will wasn't just a producer, but Will Fuller stepped up when games were on the line, or when the team needed. Because, see, clutch isn't always do you make the fourth quarter play. It's not always did you catch the game winner against Virginia. It's not always did you catch the game winner against Temple. Sometimes it's did you make the play when your team was reeling a bit to help them get back in the game. And I look to a clutch play for Will Fuller was the first offensive play of the game against USC in 2015. Well, that can be clutch on the first play because USC had just gone right down the field and scored, and it was kind of this here we go again mentality. Because remember, the year before, USC absolutely annihilated Notre Dame. It was 49-14, and it wasn't that close. And you're coming into that game that year, Ryan, and you're winning some games. You started to, you had lost to Clemson a couple weeks earlier, but you bounced back against Navy. You don't have your starting quarterback. You're facing USC, who had just beat your face in. In previous weeks. Now, they weren't that great, but, you're still 2014. They weren't great either. And the first drive of the game, it was Cody Kessler, wasn't it? Just leads them right down the field and just bam, easy touchdown for USC. And you're thinking, well, here we go again. What does Will Fuller do? The first play of the next series, he just torches the Jackson kid from
Adoree Jackson
kid from USC for a 75-yard touchdown. And just like that, a stadium went from quiet, because that was the only time I've ever seen that at Notre Dame. I saw this at Michigan in 2011, this crescendo eruption. I've talked about this on that wheel route to Jeremy. Was it Jeremy Gallon? Is who caught that pass, right?
21, right? You were 21? I think so, yeah.
In 11. And then I saw it again in 2000, or the first time I saw it was 2010 on the Little Giants play at Michigan State. I was there for that, where it's like 4th and a mile. It's a long field goal. There's no way that they know they're going to lose to Notre Dame in overtime. And then that crescendo explosion that happened when they threw that ball. Harrison Smith falls down. They throw the touchdown pass to
Charlie Gant. Yeah.
Well, the only time I've ever seen that Notre Dame was at a game that I've been at was that 2015 game, because it's pretty quiet in there. I mean, people were kind of doing the cheering of, hey, let's go team, but it was kind of like a normal cheering. It wasn't like really loud. And I was up on the roof with my wife because we were filming the game, because back then they would let me film the game to do breakdowns. They don't let me do that anymore. So she's up there filming. I'm getting her squared away, and I'm watching this play, and the ball leaves DeShone Kaiser's hands, and you hear this slow crescendo. And when Will Fuller catches it, just the place erupted. Right? Well, all of a sudden, the Notre Dame team and the Notre Dame fans said, this ain't 214 anymore. This ain't 2014 anymore, folks. Right? We are not that team anymore. You're going to have a problem today. And Notre Dame goes on to win the game. But when they needed to play, you knew where the ball was going, and there was nothing you could do about it. And I think that there needs to be something like that on this team, because, Ryan, to your point, if that kind of guy emerges, then he may not always be the guy that makes the money play. It may be, if let's say Tobias Merriweather emerges, because we're going to get into who are the alpha candidates, but one is going to be Tobias. We're going to talk about him. But let's say Tobias is just going off on a team, and it's the last series of the game. It's a tie ball game. Notre Dame is at their own 15. It's the playoff semifinal. They're playing Georgia. They got to move the ball down the field. They've got to get points on the board. They're down a point. Let's make it even more. They're down a point. Well, who's Georgia going to say, that guy ain't beating us? They're going to look at number 5 and say, 5 ain't beating us, because he's had a good game. He's played that way. He's having a Marvin Harrison type game against Georgia last year. And all of a sudden, he's not the one making play on the last drive. It's Jaden Thomas, who just smoked a safety or smoked a nickel because they're doubling Tobias. Or it's Dion making a one-on-one into the boundary because they're sliding their coverage to the field to make sure that they can high-low Tobias and keep him from making a play. Now, all of a sudden, you've got that one-on-one. Oh, shoot. They're worried about Jaden, Tobias, and Dion, and all of a sudden, Mitchell Evans sneaks free up the seam for a 35-yard gain to get him into field goal range, right? But it's because the alpha is there that they're able to play, that those guys are able to make plays, because they're now getting one-on-ones, because they're like, we're not going to let him beat us. Look at Ohio State once Marvin got knocked out of the game. Now, they had other dudes, but their offense was completely different once Marvin got knocked out of the game. And so, to me, when you have that presence in there, even when he's not making the plays, he's impacting, and he's an alpha, right? I mean, Michael Jordan made so many huge shots to win games, but if you look at Jordan and Larry Bird, two of the biggest money plays they ever made in their careers were passes, right? Then Jordan the one that kicked it out to John Paxson, right?
I believe so, yeah. Yep.
And then you think of Bird making a steal against the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals, or was it semifinals, and then tossing it to DJ and he lays it in, right? So, when I look at it, Ryan, it's a scenario where it's not just about the alpha's the guy that always makes the plays. It's his presence makes everyone else around him even better.
Sure.
And I think that is something that, to me, is even more reason why they need someone to step up early and say, if you don't account for him, he's going to rip you apart. Because if you can create that kind of guy, then it's going to make everything else better. Imagine if a team is so worried about the two outside guys that they just can't account for Jaden Thomas and Chris Tyree in the slot. And the tight end. I mean, you can't cover everybody, right? And that's kind of like what made that. Bama's another example. All the talent in the world Bama had, when their two alphas got knocked out in the championship game, they could do nothing. Had the Heisman Trophy winner quarterback, had a running back that was going to get drafted, had all the, top 5 overall draft pick at left tackle, correct? It wasn't Evan Neal, the left tackle on that team? Top 10.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, all of a sudden, you can't move the football against a team you just ripped up a month before when you had those guys healthy, or at least one of those guys healthy. And so to me, that's kind of where I'm at with this, Ryan, is that's needed for this offense. This offense cannot afford to just be a spread it around team to win a championship. If they're spreading around all year and there's no the guy, they're going to win a lot of games this year. It might even make the playoff. And it'll be fun. But I do think someone has to emerge as that dude if their offense is going to really be capable of beating Georgia, beating Bama, beating Ohio State, and going on the road and beating USC. I really do. Going on the road and beating Clemson. Excuse me. I think you need somebody to be that guy. Now, who is it going to be?
Yeah. I think it's so debilitating, man, as a defensive guy, when you just look across and you're like, anything I do defensively from a coverage perspective, not really worried. Like, you don't have a guy that worries me, right? Like, that was the biggest thing, is like, even last year, Brian, it's like everyone knew Michael Mayer was that guy, right? But other guys around him didn't step up enough, and your quarterback maybe wasn't good enough throughout the majority of the season to take advantage of one-on-one opportunities. I feel like Notre Dame is going to be in a much better and more advantageous situation this year to take advantage of one-on-one opportunities. But to your point, I mean, you had your alpha last year. That was Michael Mayer. When there was a big play, eyes went to 87. And usually he would still make the play, even if you forced it in there. But at the end of the day, man, you don't have that proven production coming back. I mean, your leading returning receiver had 600 yards for a different football team last year. That's where you're at.
A bad football team. Can I add something to what you're just saying? Well, I'm going to add something to what you're saying too, Ryan, is we've talked a lot about how open the receivers were last year.
Yep.
And how better quarterback gets in the ball. But what was part of the because you made a great point. What was part of the reason they were always getting open? Because they were always facing one-on-ones. Why? Because linebackers and safeties were constantly worried about 87. Constantly. And that's why Braden Lindsey was getting one-on-ones outside. It's why Deion Colsey was getting one-on-ones outside. It's why other guys were getting one-on-ones. That Jaden Thomas was working against nickels in the slot, and they're like, this guy can't cover Jaden Thomas.
Yeah.
Right? It's because they were worried about stopping 87. Are they good enough to get that open that consistently when they're not focused on 87? I think that's a fair question, right? It's a very fair question. I think the talent is there, but guys got to step up, right? Yeah. And so it's really that kind of game changer type of guy. It's not, somebody asked, is Hunter Renfrow an alpha? No, because Hunter Renfrow wasn't even the best receiver on his team. He was a clutch player, but he wasn't an alpha because he wasn't a guy that was going to take over a game. He wasn't a guy that you had to completely – he was the guy that got open because you were worried about Mike Williams, right? Yeah. That's who he was, and he was really good at it. But, it's like Chris Fink put up very similar Hunter Renfrow-ish type of numbers in 2018. Why? Because he was constantly catching the third and fourth best cover guy on a team. They were so worried about Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool outside that and then you had to deal with Alize Mack and Dexter Williams as the running back. You weren't worried about Chris Fink, and guess what? He'd rip you up. Yep. And so that's more of that complimentary guy, and that alpha makes those guys better, in my opinion. And that's why it's important that guy has to emerge. So let's talk a little bit about some candidates here, Ryan, that we think. And I think the most obvious one is a guy that you and I have been talking about for over a year, a guy that we think has the chance to be a star. And from everything that we're hearing in practice from sources, and I don't care not just what we see, but also what we're hearing, talking to people inside the program, talking to people that have been at practices that maybe aren't coaches and players and stuff, but see practices, talking to people on the defensive side of the ball. Every single source that I've talked to in the last 2 weeks has basically said the same thing. 5 is a stud. And that, for those who don't know, Tobias Merriweather changed his number to 5 this offseason, his high school number. That's where we start the conversation of a guy that could potentially be an alpha. It starts right there. Can he translate it into the field? We're going to find out. But in practice and from a raw talent standpoint, Ryan, Tobias Merriweather is at the top of my board for who could be that alpha type of player.
And I think it makes sense because I think he's the one that could also win in so many different ways, right? Like, I mean, we'll talk about Deion, I'm sure, in this conversation, right? But it's like Deion is that vertically oriented catch point guy, right? The guy that can create some explosive plays. You have a couple guys like Jaden Thomas who are more that slot type who can go in at being a route runner and having a physical frame. But Tobias Merriweather is the one wide receiver in the group right now in 2023 that you look like and say, he can be a vertically oriented player for you at 6'4". He can win down the football field if you need him to do that. He can also run routes and create instant separation, short to intermediate. He can do that stuff as well. He can win above the rim because, again, he's 6'4" and springy. He can win the back shoulder game because of the frame he has. So I look at him and I say, the most likely alpha, because of the fact that no matter what situation you're in, he can affect it, right? Like whether the field is condensed or you're opening things up, Tobias Merriweather has the talent to affect a football game, man. And whether you put a small corner on him, he can beat him because he's got the length and he's got those attributes. Whether you put a big physical guy and you say, hey, Tobias, you need to beat him with some finesse now, some foot quickness, ability to get in and out of breaks. He has the ability to win that way too. So I think it's the easiest bet, in my opinion, because he has a way of beating every different type of defender, right? It's like if you have a really tall, long corner who's springy against Deion Colzie, for instance, maybe you take some of what he does really well away. Maybe you could do that. But if you do that against Tobias, he's going to break off a route and get some easy separation against you, right? So I think that's the biggest thing about Tobias is that he has an ability to win in so many different ways, which makes him interesting.
He does. I think we don't need to talk a lot more about him, Ryan. Everybody knows I think he can be a stud. The question is, can you go from one catch to being an alpha? We'll find out, right?
Yep.
We've seen it before. I mean, Golden Tate and Will Fuller went from 6 catch guys to 1,000 yards the next year. And we've seen a guy with one. I mean, we saw that with Equanimity St. Brown. Had 1 catch for 8 yards in 2015. And then in 2016, he was without question their name's best receiver. Had some big games. And I think Tobias is more talented than Equanimity St. Brown was, with all due respect. Who's talented, but I think Tobias is a better player. And he went out the next year, Ryan, and I'm trying to remember. I don't remember what his specific. He had over 50 catches and over 900 yards. Okay, 58 catches for 961 yards and 9 touchdowns, 16.6 per catch. And that was in a year where they didn't make a bowl game, if you remember correctly. And so, to me, he is a guy that has 1,000 yards if they play in a bowl game. I mean, they just do. If I'll say this, if Tobias Merriweather has 58 catches for 961 yards and 9 touchdowns at 16.6 a pop in the regular season, this Notre Dame offense is going to be incredibly hard to stop. Incredibly hard to stop. Because to your point, there's going to be so much more spread around football going on that if he's putting up those kind of numbers, that means this offense is just really racking them up this season. So that would be, and I'm talking regular season, that would be fun to watch, and this offense would be outstanding. Yep. Some other guys that are capable of being alphas, Ryan. I don't know if there's a ton that are capable of being alphas. I think Deion Colzie is. I just don't know if Deion Colzie physically has the tools to be an alpha. Yep. Physically. 6'5", he's fast. He's got exceptional catch radius, strong hands. It's just what I don't question about Tobias is I know Tobias wants to be an elite. He has that kind of swagger, that kind of work. I don't know if Deion does. And that's going to be the big question with Deion. If Deion becomes a guy that just really makes his craft important, plays with an elite confidence, and just really says, I want to be great, and I'm going to go out here every single day and work to be great, then you're going to have a special group of outside receivers. I mean, it's going to be better than what it was in 2018, in my opinion, because I think Deion has a chance to be every bit as good as Chase was that year, and they're very similar. I think Chase is a little bit faster, but they're very similar athletes in a lot of ways. But I think Tobias is a better player than Miles Boykin, can be a better player than Miles Boykin, in my view. Yeah. And so, to me, it could be that. I just need to – at the very least, I expect Deion to be a very good, solid part of the rotation that's a 35, 40 catch guy. I think he'll be that. I do. I think he showed that late last year, at least a 30 catch guy, 15 yards a catch, have some good games, good rotation guy with Caleb Smith into the boundary and other, that kind of thing. But if the light goes on for Deion and he really gets in his soul, like, I want to be great, and I know I need to, every single day I need to work to get it, I don't know how you stop these out. I mean, I really truly believe that. I don't know how you stop this pass game with those two guys outside and the ability to run the football the way Notre Dame can run the football. Yeah. I really don't.
It's like that internal switch that some guys have, right? Mm. As far as like being an alpha, like Terrell Owens had it, right? Like the best have it. Jerry Rice had it. Like those guys that when they needed a big play, like, why would you not throw the football to me, right? Like I demand the football. Like there's almost a demand for it. And you don't know if Deion has that yet. You don't. I mean, what I do know,
because it doesn't just come on Saturdays, Ryan. That's the whole point. Right. You just mentioned two guys. Look, say whatever you want about T.O., and T.O. was a character.
Yes.
But you know what I never heard anyone mention, and you may know better than me because you're living near Philadelphia. I never heard anyone say the guy doesn't work.
Oh, no. No one has ever said that about Terrell Owens. No.
Never heard that. I've heard that about Des Bryant.
Yep.
But never about Terrell Owens. I never heard that about Reggie Wayne. I never heard that about Jerry Rice. I never heard that. Michael Irvin was a
worker.
I mean, but off the field, he would get into trouble. But when he was at practice, he worked.
Yes.
He worked. Yep. And I think that's the thing with Deion. And we're not saying he doesn't work. It's like it's set up all along. I'm not saying he's lazy. I'm not saying he doesn't care. I'm saying there's a difference between what you think is the level needed to be great and what actually is the level needed to be great. And that's what separates the best players from the not best players. It's not just physical tools all the time. It's do you truly understand the level of focus and work needed for you to maximize your potential as a player? That's something that's plagued Chase Claypool his entire career in college and the pros. If Chase Claypool had the work ethic of a Cooper Kupp or a Devontae Adams, he'd be one of the 10 best receivers in the NFL. I truly believe that, because how many guys out there are 6'4.5", 230 that run low 4.4s that can jump 40 inches in the NFL?
Not many.
There aren't, and can make plays after the catch. There aren't many. Chase's thing is that I don't think Chase really understands what it takes to be great, and he's not working to get there. That's the difference. Now, Deion and Chase are different kids. I don't think Deion's a great kid. I mean, involved in the community and a really good student. He gets life outside of football, and I have no fault that. My point is, does he really understand what he needs to do on a daily basis to be great? That's the question. And does he want to? I think he wants, but there's the mental acknowledgement of I want to, and then there's the burning desire in your soul that I want to.
Relentless. Right. Yeah. I mean, Terrell Owens is a great example, Brian, because Terrell Owens was a worker, man. Like, he was relentless. And, like, again, no matter what you think about him, like, that guy was going to take your lunch money, man. Like, he didn't care. Like, he was like, I am going to – that's why a guy comes from the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and then goes on to have 15,000 plus yards receiving in the NFL, right? Because he had that internal drive that you can't teach. Like, you really can't teach that, man. Like, you can teach better habits, but, like, that's usually one of those things where, like, you're born with that or you don't. Or, like, you have it or you don't, right? If Deion has it, I mean, I've been picking him as a breakout star all offseason, right? Because I think that he can do that type of stuff. If he has that internal drive, kid could be a superstar.
Yeah,
he's 6'5" and can run and has
a lot faster than people think he is, Ryan. He's a lot faster than people think. I think people think he's like a 4.6 something guy. I wouldn't be shocked if right now he's running around 4.5. I've heard some things about Deion's speed, and his track numbers are pretty good too. But at 6'5" with those long legs, he can run. He can really run. Is he Marvin Harrison Jr. fast? No, I'm not saying that. But he could do similar things as a boundary guy. And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. A couple other guys, Ryan. Jaden Thomas, to me, is not an alpha. What I think Jaden Thomas is going to be is just money.
Clutch,
I think what he could be is he could be the Hunter Renfrow. Now, completely different type of body types and players, but Jaden may not ever be your leading receiver. He may not ever be your guy, but he may be the guy that catches the game-winning touchdown pass in the championship game, right? I mean, do you see what I'm saying? Like, he's going to be that man. Tobias had the game-winning catch for a touchdown, or Deion had the game-winning catch for a touchdown. But do you remember that 3rd down and 5 that Jaden converted to set them up for the touchdown? That's what I think Jaden Thomas can be this season. So I don't think Jaden is an alpha. I don't think Caleb Smith is an alpha. I don't even think Lorenzo Styles is an alpha. Even I expect him to be the team's best receiver last year, but I don't think he's got that alpha tools that like a Will Fuller had at his size. I think the other alphas that they have, Ryan, are the freshmen. I think Jaden
Yeah.
Greathouse has alpha talent, and I think Braylon James has alpha talent in a different type of way. I just don't see that happening in 2023. I don't think either one of those guys are going to be alphas this season. They're going to need time. But for this team, I think it really comes down to Dion and Tobias are the best two chances they have for alphas. I don't think Chris Tyree's an alpha, but I think Chris Tyree's the kind of guy that if your outside guys are stepping up, Chris Tyree will be the home run hitter.
Yeah.
He only needs 2 or 3 touches to do it. If you're worried about that, because if you're worried about that, Ryan, what happens? You've got to spread out. You've got to widen out your defense. And that's when all of a sudden a guy like Chris Tyree's running a tunnel screen, you know what I mean? And, now all of a sudden you're off to the races. And but it all comes down to because you're so worried about the running game, the line, the 2 monsters on the outside, Sam Hartman throwing the ball up. And next thing you know, I'm faking a bomb to Tobias, and I'm coming back. Tyree's running a little under tunnel over here, and next thing you know, it's peace out. You know what I mean? And those are the things that I'm looking forward to seeing. But it's got to come down to at least one of those 2 guys has to step up and be that guy. If they both do, I mean, it's a wrap. They're a playoff team. But I don't know if either one of them will. So that's the thing is, if they both do, this is going to be a great team. But I don't know if either one of them are going to be able to do that this season. And that's what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about Tobias being an alpha next year. We're talking about, can he be that guy this year?
Yep. As a sophomore.
That's the question.
Yeah.
That's the question.
And I think you've said this before, but like Dion is also a very young junior, right? Like he's not like an older junior. Like he's a young
more
guy
sophomore
too,
age wise. And he played at a school that just, I mean, he played at a very academic, or he went to a very academically oriented school, and it just the quality of the talent he was going against wasn't good. So it comes down to, I think Dion wants to be great. I just don't think Dion completely understands the work and the mentality that goes into it's not just the practice, it's the film session, it's the weight room workout, it's the what are you doing in June when you're home visiting family and nobody's paying attention? Do you really are you out there pushing yourself the way that you've heard the stories about Magic and Larry? They'd be home and Larry's like, well, I gotta shoot 1,000 free throws a day because I know Magic's shooting 1,000 free throws. And Magic was like, well, I got to shoot 2,000 free throws because I know Larry's shooting 2,000 free throws. And just it's that level of, I don't care where I'm at. It's because I'm striving for something, and no matter where I'm at, I'm always focused on that and working on that. And that's what separates those guys from that's why Miles Boykin hasn't been very good in the NFL. And that's why I don't think Miles Boykin, I would even count him as an alpha. He was a really good player, but I don't think he was an alpha. And he had some money catches because I just don't think Miles Boykin ever had that I want to beat you every single day mentality.
Right.
I don't. And that's the thing is they had those great receivers in 18, but I don't think either of them had quite had that alpha mentality. Chase had the confidence of an alpha, but did he have the focus and maturity of an alpha? I don't think that he did. At least not that season. He was more so that in 2019. Miles definitely, to me, wasn't that guy in my view. He was very good, but not that. So we'll find out if any of these guys do.
Hope so, man, because I do think there's some dependable players on this offense, right? Because, I mean, you mentioned Jane Thomas. Like, I think Jane Thomas is just going to do the job, man. He's going to catch every third down that he needs to catch, and he's going to separate when he needs to separate. When you need him, he'll be there, right? Like, I think that he's going to be a very dependable football player. I think the tight end position could be that way. As long as they're healthy, I feel like they are going to make the plays that they need to make, right? The running backs, I expect the running game to be there. But at the end of the day, man, we're talking about that one or two guys going from good role players or very good role players to being guys that you need to account for in every single play. And there's a big difference there, man. And I'm like thinking, I mean, like Brian, in the passing game, I mean, if we're talking about like some past champions, right? Like you talk about the Georgias and the Alabamas and, everyone in between, they almost always, I think they all had that guy, right? I mean, it's different last year with Georgia, right? I mean, they had a tight end doing it,
but
right?
He was still that
alpha.
guy.
He was still that
and
guy.
And the way he played tight end was more like a big receiver than
he's big slot.
End.
Big slot.
Yeah.
But I mean, to the Devonta Smiths in 2020, right? To the Justin Rosses and T. Higgins in 2018, to the Jamar Chases,
and Justin Jefferson in 2019. No, you're right. I mean, and Brock Bowers is kind of. I think the closest you could come to that was Brock Bowers in 2021.
Yeah.
But even then, in the postseason, he was pretty good. But he wasn't quite that. He wasn't what he was this year, in my opinion.
Sure. Because he's still a true freshman.
2017, you didn't really have that kind of guy at Bama. So there have been years, but again, it's who are the teams that always get away without that? It's Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State. Because again, I don't think Ohio State had an alpha in 2014. Their alpha was a running back. That's who their alpha was.
He was an alpha, man.
You know,
he was an alpha.
As much as I love Notre Dame's running back, none of those guys are Ezekiel Elliott in college.
Sure.
I mean, they're not that. You know, and so they at least had an alpha on offense. It just wasn't that guy. And so, yeah, right. Most of those teams, and a lot of those teams have had two. I mean, you talk about Clemson in 18 and LSU in 19, but it's not the norm. Like John Mechie wasn't an alpha in 2020. He was a really good complementary player to their alpha.
Well, they had Jalen Waddle before he got injured, though.
Right, but he wasn't in there in the postseason.
Right, sure.
And I don't even view him as an alpha, right? I view him as a dynamic, big-time playmaker. But an alpha is a guy that's going to, like, take over a game. I think that's a little bit more debatable, to be honest with you. I think he was a byproduct of just the fact that you had – I'll say this. If you put Jaden Waddle in the position that they asked Devontae to be in after Jaden got hurt and you reverse roles, Jaden doesn't do what Devontae did that year. He was more, to me, needed to be – because you couldn't put him on the outside and just let him win. His production came from the fact that you had to worry about so many other guys. That's at that point in his career. Could he have become that down the road? Maybe, but he wasn't that in 20. He was a guy that was complimentary. Now, what I loved about Jaden Waddle is he showed me that in the postseason he had some toughness because he was not healthy in the title game at all, at all. And he showed me some toughness. But you know, he's that guy that needed to be used. It's kind of like the difference between. This is going to sound weird. It's like the difference between like a Tyreek Hill and, you know, some Cooper Kupps and Devontae Adams's type of guys, right? He's dynamic and he's a big-time playmaker, but I've always felt like for him to really take over a game, he needed to be part of something because he wasn't that guy that could just by himself go out there and beat you rep after rep after rep. That's just kind of how I've always felt. But I could be wrong. But the point is, when they got to the postseason, this is what we agree on, a Bama team did not have that in the postseason. They had one alpha in the postseason. But you know what they had? A great trigger man.
Yep.
And that's something that those teams had, which circles back to point number one. Let's move on to our final topic here, Ryan, and we'll be somewhat brief, but I kind of expected it. And even with me expecting it, I'm still surprised at the takes we're seeing this offseason about Michael Mayer. Yeah. And the manner in which he's fallen in the draft. Because I would argue that Michael Mayer is one of the 10 best just football players in this draft. Just like I thought Kyle Hamilton was last year. But he's being picked apart by all the things that he supposedly can't do. And he continues to, from a perception standpoint. Now there's the Twitter, the draft Twitter people that are just not to be taken serious. But then it's all, but as you made a point in an article you wrote today at Irish Breakdown, I'd encourage you all to go check it out. It's people that are respected. Daniel Jeremiah doesn't have him, I believe, as his top tight end. And I don't care much for Todd McShay, and I don't care where Todd McShay has him, but Todd McShay gets a lot of his opinions from people in the league.
Yep.
And then uses those opinions to do his mock draft, which is, I think, how you should properly do a mock draft. It's not just, you know, me doing it for fun, but hey, here's what I'm hearing. Here's how I could see this thing playing out. That kind of thing.
Yep.
Some of these takes for Michael Mayer are getting a little bit crazy. And I thought yesterday was the worst is Chris Sims.
It was the worst.
Had who's pretty bad, but he works at NBC Sports.
Yes.
Right. He covers Notre Dame. He has covered Notre Dame games before. He not only had Michael Mayer as the number 3 tight end in the draft, which is bad enough.
Yes.
And he not only had him behind Sam Laporta, which is bad enough, and Sam Laporta's a good football player. Yep. He had him as a tier 3 player.
Yes.
I mean, it's just getting it's getting stupid at this point in time, Ryan.
I mean, for not to highlight this ranking because I thought it was ludicrous, right? But first one, right, Brian? It was not the surprising one. I saw Chris had Dalton Kincaid as his tight end one. I'm like, fine, man. Like I've seen that all over the place. Like, cool, like whatever. I've now seen literally at different times this offseason from reputable people too, not from just little guy on draft Twitter, right? From reputable people that have had Michael Mayer as the first tight end off the board. Dalton Kincaid is the guy that you see a lot. Darnell Washington from Georgia is another guy. And then Luke Musgrave has even been a first tight end off the board from Oregon State at some point this offseason, right? So Chris had Dalton Kincaid as his tight end one. I don't agree, but we've been doing this battle all offseason, right? It's like, okay, fine. That's who you think. We'll see when the NFL careers are over. We'll be able to look at that then. But then he had Sam Laporta as his tight end too. And I'm like, man, I don't know what we're doing here, right? Like, I'm not sure what we're doing. Sam Laporta is a very solid NFL prospect, a really good college football player. Was one of maybe the only redeeming quality of a really bad Iowa offense last year, man. He was a good player. He was a good player for Iowa last year. He had
epically bad.
Yes. He had over 600 yards as a tight end. Like, he's a very good football player.
With one of the worst Power 5, with one of the worst Division I quarterbacks in the country. I mean, forget Power 5. He is one of the worst quarterbacks in all of college football last year.
But Brian, even that one, I was like, okay, at least he ran 4.59 at the combine, and you're like, okay, he's fast, he has some production, and he went to Iowa, right? Where it's like Iowa is producing tight ends too, so like, cool, fine. I still think it's ridiculous, but like, I can move on from this conversation and not lose my mind. But then, like you said, he didn't just rank these tight ends; he put them into tiers.
Yeah,
one, he had Dalton Kincaid tier 1, okay. Clear break. Tier 2, Sam Laporta. Okay. Tier 3, he had Michael Mayer. And not even that was what set me off the most. It was who was in the tier 3 with him. He had Darnell Washington, which again, I understand. Dude's massive, very talented. Production isn't there yet, but like if you're just banking on upside, okay. We can have that conversation. I'll have that conversation with you all day. He had as his 4th-ranked tight end in the same tier as Michael Mayer, one spot behind Michael Mayer. He had Josh Wiley from Cincinnati.
Oh.
That's where I lost my mind. I lost my mind. I lost my mind.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking and I'm like, the best season that Josh Wiley ever had for the Cincinnati Bearcats was actually his sophomore year, where he had like 28 receptions for 360 yards and 6 touchdowns. Solid little year, right? Solid. That would have been the 4th best season in Michael Mayer's career. And folks, if you haven't been watching Michael Mayer's career, he only played 3 seasons. Mm-hmm. Literally, he would have had to play another year and probably had to sit out games to have a season that Josh Wiley had. So he doesn't have the production. Some people are going to say he's 6'6" and a half. He's got a better frame. Not really, because Josh Wiley has 31 and something inch
31
arms.
and a half.
Yeah.
31 and a half.
He's not longer than Michael Mayer. They have like the same catch radius, despite him being 2 inches shorter, just about. So he doesn't have the size attributes. Oh, upside. It's got to be upside.
Nope.
Let's go to the testing numbers. They're almost exactly the same across the board. He ran 4.69. Michael Mayer ran 4.7 flat. And by the way, Michael Mayer is also heavier than Josh Wiley, guys. He's heavier than him too. Testing numbers are the same. So he's less productive.
And if you look at Mayer's pro day numbers, he's then now better than what Wiley was. Their combine numbers are almost identical, but Mayer had much better numbers at the pro day.
Yes.
And that's on a notoriously, I believe, a slow Notre Dame track.
And he was also like 3 pounds heavier. Like I think Michael Mayer was 252 that day, right? Where it's just like, so the upside thing doesn't match. The production thing doesn't match. Michael Mayer is also younger than Josh Wiley. Josh Wiley was a 5th-year senior, and Michael Mayer is a 3rd-year junior. I think we also lose sight of the fact that Michael Mayer is the 2nd youngest tight end in the 2023 NFL draft, only behind Darnell Washington. It's not like he's this old dude that you're just like, that's all he is. He's only 21 years old, man.
Exactly.
Like he still can get
People
better.
act like he's some 5th or 6th year senior, Ryan. He was a true junior this year. A true junior.
At this point, man, it's just become so ludicrous because I understand that people get excited about some athletic traits, right? And that's why I look at Dalton Kincaid and I'm like, I don't agree.
Right.
I don't agree. But at least I can have the conversation with you. But we really lose sight of the floor conversation in these conversations as well, too, right? Because Michael Mayer can affect the game in so many different ways more than what Dalton Kincaid can do. He's been more productive than Darnell Washington. Darnell Washington's 700-something yards and 3 touchdowns in his career would be a below-average season for Michael Mayer. And then you're talking about Luke Musgrave, who just played 2 football games this year and hasn't been as productive as Michael Mayer either. There's just so many holes in these arguments. I just don't understand it. We are overthinking Michael Mayer, similarly to how people overthought Kyle Hamilton last year. Now, Kyle still ended up being the first safety off the board, which he was always going to be. He ended up being 14th overall pick. Still a good spot, right? But he should have been a top 10 player in last year's draft. He should have been. Mm-hmm. He should have been, despite being a safety. Michael Mayer, I think, is still going to be the first tight end off the board. I still believe that. But the reality is that I'm less certain about that than what I was about Kyle Hamilton still going top 10 to 15 last year. Like, there's some uncertainty here, man. And if Michael Mayer is the second or third tight end off the board in this class, that is some serious overthinking by the NFL, man. It's just a bad evaluation, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm seeing people saying Michael Mayer shouldn't be a first-round pick, and I'm just like, oh, my gosh. Like, I get that at running back, but tight end is such an important part. I mean, just go watch the Super Bowl. I mean, who was the guy making the money plays for really both of those teams in that game? It was the tight ends.
Kelsey, man. Yeah.
And Dallas Goedert for Philadelphia made huge plays in that game.
Yep, for Philadelphia. It's a really good player. And he's a player that, when you look at his athletic numbers, because that's the big thing about Michael Mayer, how athletic he is. Yeah. He's very close to Dallas Goedert. He's very close to Mark Andrews, very close to Jason Witten. Like, some of the best tight ends we've seen.
Like, faster tight end than he's not that far off of Mark Andrews, who ran a 4.67
at all.
You know, TJ Hawkinson ran what, a 4.7
flat. Yep,
it's exactly what Mayer ran.
Yep.
So some of the stuff is just it's kind of comical at this point in time, Ryan. Now here's a question I have for you.
Yeah.
Do you think this is just specific to Notre Dame, or do you think it's just been kind of a coincidence that it's happened to Notre Dame players kind of a couple years in a row? Do you think it's just kind of coincidence because of an obsession over the combine performances?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a coincidence. I don't actually think it's a Notre Dame bias thing. Like, there are some things, and we've talked about like the recruiting ranking thing. Like, there are definitely Notre Dame bias in my opinion. There's no doubt about it. I don't think this is necessarily one. I think that it's more hyper focusing on a safety last year, and also him being a safety, right? Like, that's kind of a position that teams are putting less stock into for whatever reason. And then also, I think it's just Michael Mayer isn't a sexy athlete, right? Like, he isn't a guy that's going to run 4.5. So some people are overthinking that, in my opinion.
But how many tight ends are doing that? That's my whole thing.
People just have Kyle Pitts on the mind,
right? Man. But Kyle Pitts won the top 5, didn't he? Where did Kyle Pitts get picked?
He was top 5.
Like,
I think he was
the
highest
right?
He was Falcons? I think he was the highest drafted tight end ever. So yeah.
My whole thing is, no one's saying he should go 4th. No one's saying Michael Mayer should go 4th. And so I'm fine with that. But this notion that people are now advocating for it just shows, for one, it just goes to show that there's way too many people doing draft analysis now. Yeah. Way too many people.
Well, luckily for NBC Sports, they just hired Connor Rogers to do theirs, so maybe we'll get less of Chris Sims, which would be good. So
yeah, we'll see about that. We'll see about that. I don't have a lot of faith that Chris Sims is not going to be doing a lot of NFL draft stuff. So yeah, we shall see. But it gets frustrating a little bit, honestly. I think part of it too is because neither of them were workout warriors, like testing warriors, and I really felt like Michael Mayer, I thought, tested right on par or better than he was projected to.
But above average in every area.
Yes. Above average in every area. I mean, his 3-cone, he's a 6'9" 3-cone at the pro day. That's pretty good. Yeah. But I feel like he needed to like test great to get rid of the stigma that surrounds him about the lack of separation, which the thing that I don't see that on film, Brian. I don't see an inability to separate on film. That's the other thing. And you watch, and I'm watching Dalton Kincaid's film, all 22, and I'm like, this guy's not separating any better than Michael Mayer did. And in a lot of cases, not even as good. The scheme is getting him wide open, right? So he's beating zones. He plays against bad defenses almost every week. He did almost nothing against the 3 best defenses he played all year. In 2 of those 3 games against really good teams, Ryan, and I'd say probably the 3 best defenses he faced this year were Florida, Oregon State, and Washington State. In 2, would you agree? At least it's in the conversation. In 2 of those 3 games, he averaged minus 10 yards a catch. He had 7 for 56 against Washington State, and I think he went 3 for 17 against Oregon State. He went for 2 for 29 against Florida.
Yeah.
So I'm just I don't understand where this notion comes from that he's just somehow a much better player.
I think it's I think it's the body type stuff too, man. Like you look at Michael Mayer, you're just like, that's a throwback style tight end from a body type perspective, right? Like how Dalton Kincaid looks at the tight end position is more of the rage now, right? That's where the trend is going. I just think it's lazy because I agree, Brian. Like I actually thought that Dalton Kincaid and Michael Mayer were going to test pretty similarly. It just so happens that Dalton Kincaid didn't test at all in the combine or the pro day.
What an injury.
Yeah, right.
Could you imagine if in this, it all goes to me, there is a bias. If Michael Mayer didn't test, could you imagine the nitpicking people? I mean,
yeah.
Now, again, I'm not blaming the kid for not testing. He's coming back from an injury that cost him the end of this, end of the season. It's going to be interesting.
And if Dalton Kincaid tested the way that Michael Mayer did, everyone would be screaming, "Go back to the film."
Right.
Meanwhile, what film are we watching that Michael Mayer isn't the best tight end in this class? I'm just a little confused about this whole conversation. It's a little inconsistent line of thinking, in my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show, Ryan. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next. But before we get to the mailbag, I would ask that you folks do us a favor. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Again, if you're listening via podcast form, please, and you like the Lucky Lefty show and you like the CFB All-America and Ryan's Rise and Draft show, please make sure you subscribe to the actual CFB Nation app. You can find it the same places you can find IB Nation because eventually at some point in the summer, we're going to remove those from the IB feed and just getting back to having IB only shows on there. We're going to also continue to grow that channel. As everything else I do, Ryan, it's slow and steady, right? I want to make sure we do it right or we don't do it at all. But we will have a lot more content on that as we get into the season. And it's going to be including us doing some of that content, putting it out there for there's things I want to do that are college football related, not necessarily Notre Dame related, that we're going to put on that platform this year. And I'm very excited to do that. So make sure you hit subscribe to that. Sign up for our newsletter down below, Ryan. And of course, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Mr. Roberts, let's dive into the mailbag, sir. We have a super sticker from T-Guns, Crocs and Glocks with a 1545 super sticker. Appreciate you very, very, very much. We got a question here, Ryan, from We're Waiting. I'm going to answer it first, and then you can kind of get into reading the questions after this, but this is more for you. And we'll kind of do, if it's draft or recruiting, I'll read it for you. This is from We're Waiting, little Caddyshack reference there. If Sam Hartman didn't run the delayed mesh at Wake, could he have been a first-round pick this year instead of having to transfer to improve his stock?
No. I mean, if Sam Hartman would have declared for this draft, let me backtrack for a second. The slow mesh isn't the thing that NFL evaluators want to see out of Sam Hartman. Like, that's not the difference of him being a really good prospect and him not being a really good prospect. I think we kind of fixate on this slow mesh stuff so much, right? Slow mesh is just it's a function of a running game, right? Out of the RPO looks. Like, that's what it is, right? That's not oh my gosh, he runs the slow mesh, he can't play in the NFL level. Like, that's not what it is.
It did keep him from showing certain things that other guys do, but it's not like those things aren't still on his film. There are still pure drop back passes and things like that on his film. It doesn't, It's not like running the option where you really don't know what a guy can do because he's running the triple option.
Right. Where nothing is translatable. Right. Where nothing's translatable.
It doesn't mean that there aren't some technical things that have to get fixed and all that, but it's not something that's like, oh my God, if he wasn't doing that, he's a first round pick. It's just, it's still annoying.
I think what NFL scouts want to see, slow mesh stinks, man. It absolutely stinks. But what NFL scouts want to see is him doing it on a week-to-week basis. We talked about those pillar games again, right? We talked about the Ohio States, the Clemsons, the USCs. They want to see Sam Hartman be able to play his best football in those types of games for one. We want to see that. Another thing you want to see is let's cut down on some of the turnover-worthy throws,
bad turnovers.
right?
Yeah.
Yes, the bad ones. Let's make sure that we're being a little more careful with the football, and let's make sure that we're processing consistently on a snap-to-snap basis. If he does those things, I think he could probably sneak on to day 2 of the draft. I don't think there's any world, and this is just my opinion. Some people might disagree, and crazier things have happened, I guess. But I don't see first-round tools with Sam Hartman. I think he has good tools. I don't think he has those types of tools where he's going to be that massive riser to go in the first round. But I think he was going to get drafted probably 5th, 6th, 7th, somewhere in that ballpark. So like mid, late day 3 this year. If you told me that he had a really good year, if he could go in the 3rd rounds, I believe you. I think that could happen. I think he could sneak into day 2. I just don't see first round tools.
And there's always some team falls in love with a guy, right? And they draft him where they are. You know, my response is always going to be this, Ryan, and it's going to be this until the end of time. If Christian Ponder can be a first round pick in this era, Sam Hartman can. But we would all look back. I say that jokingly, but we all look back and say, but that was an obvious mistake.
Yeah.
There's always a chance some team, and this is what Ryan's saying, there's always some chance that some team falls in love with him and drafts him late in the 1st round or early 2nd. There's always that chance, but you can't predict that. You can't predict that some team is going to fall in love with the guy beyond what everyone else on the planet is going to fall in love. Some team may panic. Remember the kid from, was it Alabama State? They got picked in the 1st round a couple years ago.
Oh, Titus Howard.
And it's because like there was a run on tackles and that team, I think it was the Texans, like panicked.
Yes.
That guy had no business going that high, but some team made a mistake or panicked or whatever. Those things can always happen, but I just don't see it, especially with who we expect to be in next year's draft.
Yeah.
I just don't see it.
Big shock. Titus Howard has not been very good in the NFL.
Shocker.
Yeah.
Shocker. Yeah. Didn't see that coming. Here, get back on track, Ryan.
From Call Me Ty says, if Ben Minich fills out physically by his senior year, is he still a safety? I know he isn't the tallest guy, but could you see him moving into the rover position?
I don't.
I think Don Schuler is the more likely guy.
I don't see him. No, I think he's still a thinner guy. I don't think if he maxes out his physicality, he's maybe a 200-pound safety. I think Ben Minich is a safety. I think now, could he play like some nickel stuff?
I was going to say
that's different than being a rover to me.
Yes.
Nickel and because Tariq Bracy lined up the same place Jack Kaiser didn't make him a rover.
Yeah.
So it may be something like that. But no, I think he's a 3rd level guy to me. I think he's a guy you want playing on the 3rd level of the defense. That's where I think Ben's game is. He's instinctive. He can run. He can cover a lot of ground. I think those are all spots you want on that 3rd level.
Yeah,
I think so.
I think he's a really nice boundary safety in this system where like you rotate him to the middle of the field. He can do a lot of stuff working from depth. And I think it's really nice. To your point, I think he can do some nickel stuff, but like rover and nickel are very different positions, right? Like you don't want the alignments get reduced and now Ben Minich is a Sam linebacker, right? Like that's not where you want to live. That's not where you want him to make his money. Making his money is from working from depth on the 3rd level. Agree completely.
Yeah. All right, let's get to let's get to the next one here from Wade Garrett.
Wade
I don't know why I keep doing that. I always say that I want you to read that, but I just can't help myself pull it up. I don't know why I have that tick, man. I'm sorry about that.
Good. You're good, man. Wade says, if you were Marcus Freeman, would you delay naming a starter until fall, assuming the competition is close, to try and prevent Tyler Buckner from going into the portal, if that's even a thought process? I hate that, man. I think that is so deceptive if that is the case. Like, I don't like that at all, Wade. I don't. That's dishonest, man.
Let's just say, Ryan, that they do that, and Tyler Buckner's never going to trust them again.
Ever again in his life, yeah.
And now you've not only done that, but you've now screwed the kid. Be honest with him. And look, based on Marcus Freeman's track record, I fully anticipate them being completely honest with Tyler Buckner. That's exactly why Drew Pine transferred. They could have easily manipulated Drew Pine to where he stayed for the bowl game. Easily. They didn't. They told him before the portal opened that this is what's going to happen, and that's why Drew jumped in the portal when it opened. Because they were honest with him. I'd be surprised and very disappointed if they did that. You delay naming the starter because you feel like you're not in a position yet where it's good for you to name one, which can come of 2 ways. One is Sam hasn't outplayed Tyler to the degree where you should name him the starter yet. Or 2, you don't feel your football team is in a place yet where you need to name one. And a big part of this, and I discussed this on a show I was on the other day, and it was I got to remember the name of the show. I can't believe, but they did these two guys had me on, Jason and Eric, they did a great job with some of the questions. But the thing that I said was, it's about the quarterback competition it's not always just about, okay, this guy's better than that guy. Sometimes it's about, you need to make sure that Sam Hartman is won over his teammates completely before you name him. And you've got to make sure that you have made it clear that Sam has had to earn it, because it's not only just about your quarterback room. It's about, if your football team does not believe that your starting quarterback who transferred from the outside truly won that job, you're going to create a split in your locker room.
Yeah.
It's a fact. So there's all types of things that go into this besides just, is Sam out playing Tyler or whatever the case may be. Timing is important too. Now, do I anticipate Tyler Buckner starting this year? Not barring injury. I think Sam's going to be the guy. And I don't want to delay it to keep Tyler here. I think that's dishonest and unfair to Tyler. I hope that Tyler stays because he understands the bigger picture of what's at stake here. Yep. And because he wants to be at Notre Dame. And if he does that, then I think they're going to be fine. But you never, ever, ever keep a kid in your school by lying. And that's what it is, right? It's lying to him.
Yeah.
It's, the answer, but you're telling him, no, it's still a battle. That's a lie. That's just a flat out lie.
It's impossible to buy into someone if you don't trust them, man.
That's
like,
right.
And if there's no buy-in at the end of the day, like when there's a big game or there's a big play that's on the line, how can I trust the coach to put me in the right position if I can't even trust him to be honest with me, right? Like there's just that deception, I think, really goes from the top all the way to the bottom, man. And it absolutely kills programs. Right. I really do. Like, just from a moral perspective, I don't like that at all. I don't like it. Like it's that you're hurting that kid's future potentially by lying to him, because you're not only messing up your relationship with him, a place that he's now stuck at, quote unquote, you're also not letting him have the opportunity to do what he wants to do, right? To make his own decision. So I don't like that at all. It happens, right? Like people do that, but
Marcus Freeman doesn't strike me as that kind. I mean, and not even just personally, he doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. From a track record standpoint, he hasn't been that way so far. Yeah. He's been very upfront and honest with kids, which is why you've seen a number of kids transfer, because they've been, hey, look, there's no plans for you here. You're not going to play here. So I'd be surprised by that and incredibly disappointed, but there's no evidence that Marcus Freeman would do that kind of thing. And I understand where Wade's coming from, because it's about protecting your team and all that, but you can't do it that way. You can't do it that way. I'll read this one real quick. This is from Ryan Michael. It says, happy anniversary. Did you enjoy it? What did you do to celebrate? Ryan, thank you very much for that. I did very much. I ended up kind of taking most of the day off, and day off for me, Ryan, I'm still like doing work, but we kind of hung out a little bit and just talked and just kind of enjoyed each other's company. My wife loves Ruth's Chris. So what I did is I used some of my work credit card, and my credit cards, I get like gift cards. And so I used, the money I've spent on things to get a Ruth's Chris gift card so it wouldn't sting as much, because those are expensive bills. So I had a nice gift card for that. But no, we went there and enjoyed it and spent some time together, and then came back last night and hung out again last night. So I was going to do a show, but I was like, you know what? Like, I didn't want to. I wanted to hang out with my wife. I actually like my wife quite a bit, so I like spending time with her when I can. So, we just relaxed, really, and hung out, which is nice. Because, I've already kind of got our anniversary presents before. And then we're going to go out. She needs a new Apple Watch, so we're just going to go out and buy a Apple Watch today. Because I guess the 15th anniversary is like the timepiece thing, and she can't buy me a watch because I don't wear watches. But, for her, she needs a new Apple Watch, so I'm going to go buy her a new Apple Watch. Nice. So that's what we're going to plan to do. Today.
Which are also very expensive. So.
Yeah, they are. They are. That's Ryan. That's why I'm such a tightwad, man. You know this. So I can take care of my wife. So, we had a lot of fun. All right, let's get back on track here.
Next question is from John A1. Thank you for the question, John. What are the differences between Sam Hartman and Tyler Buckner overall in the run game, attack, both positives and negatives?
There's over on the run game. I think the biggest difference, Ryan, is obvious. It's Tyler is a weapon in the run game, whereas Sam will make plays with his legs, but it's more as a chain mover, extender to a degree. But a lot of his runs are him stepping into the pocket and taking off, because he's a good athlete. He's just not a runner. But when he does run, he can run he's got a couple 20-yard touchdown runs under his belt. As we mentioned, he had 11 rushing touchdowns in 2021. A lot of those were plays breaking down, him stepping into the pocket and run. There's a little bit of Ian Book to him in that regard, Ryan. I think Ian's a more explosive athlete than Sam is. I don't see Sam running in the 4.5s like Ian did, but as far as most of Ian's runs came from pass plays breaking down.
Yeah.
And that's where Sam's will come from. Whereas with Tyler, he's going to actually make plays with his legs as part of the run game, which we saw in the bowl game last year and throughout his freshman year. Other differences are, as of right now, Sam's a little bit ahead of Tyler for what they've done in their career in the RPO game. From a decision-making standpoint, that's an extension of the run game. I think that how you defend a Tyler Buchner-led offense in the run game is going to be different. You have to be much more conscious of the direct overhang and edge when Tyler's in the game for two reasons. One is not just the pulls, but also Notre Dame likes to run the counter stuff with Tyler. You have to defend that a lot differently than when you are with Sam. You have to defend empty differently with Sam than Tyler, because as we saw in the bowl game last year, Tyler can drop and whether it be a designed run or part of an RPO, because Notre Dame will run a concept, and a lot of teams with mobile quarterbacks will do this, Ryan, is they'll either go empty or 4 wide, and they'll basically run a concept in the pass game, and the quarterback takes a quick drop, and if the quick game is there, he throws it, or if he reads it correctly, he'll fake a drop and then go because his read took him to go. So it's an RPO type of read that you'll have, and that's going to be a lot more dangerous with Tyler than Sam. So I think those are aspects of it. But then I think the other part is Sam's effectiveness in the pass game is a little different than Tyler's, and then that's going to alter how you defend the run game there as well. So I think those for me are the primary ways that you're going to see the run game get impacted by, depending on who's in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest key is you hit on it, right, is that there's a variety to the run game from a quarterback run game perspective, right? Like, not talking as much about the RPO game, but like you can run the zone read, you can run quarterback power, you can even run quarterback sweep if you wanted to with Tyler Buchner. Like, you can do all that different type of stuff. You can run speed option with him if you wanted to. Sam Hartman's much more inside zone you to death, and then, the guy collapsed, I'm going to take it out the back door now for a nice little gain, right? Or your ability to nothing's open, 3rd and 4, I'm going to get 6 on a scramble, right? And be able to step up into the pocket. But from a quarterback run game perspective, not counting RPO, John, just again to kind of like reiterate, it's that you're a lot more varied on what you can do with Tyler, just because he is a legit athlete, man. Like Tyler, he could play other positions if he wanted to, right? Like from an athleticism perspective. Mm-hmm. Sam is a true quarterback, but he can do enough with his legs where you have to stay disciplined on the backside of runs. You have to stay disciplined, or else he can't pull it and he can get you 10, 15 yards on a scramble, or he can pull it inside the 10 and then score a touchdown off the backside. Like, he's that type of runner, in my opinion.
Agree. Let's get to this next one from John A1.
John said, if a raw but extremely explosive wide receiver is a spring enrollee, how far along can a good wide receiver coach be expected to develop that player by midseason of the freshman year? That really depends on the player, you know?
Well, like depends on the player, it depends on the depth chart, it depends on the offense. For example, it's going to be a little harder to get Braylon James going by the middle of the season on this current team than it would have been maybe in 2018. The reason I say that is because 2018, there was such a lack of depth behind the couple veterans that the freshmen, you needed Kevin Austin to play. You almost had to force him into the rotation, which they did early in the season. And that's going to create a lot more rep opportunities. The reality is when you have Tobias and you have Lorenzo and you have Jaden and you have Dion and you have Caleb Smith and you have Matt Salerno and you have the other freshmen that are there with you, it's hard to justify taking those reps to give to Braylon to push him into a rotation by the middle of the next season. So there's just going to be a little less opportunity there. You're not going to maybe keep him with the ones at the start of fall camp, the start of the season, because he's the number 6 or 7 guy and you want to give your scout team a look. Whereas if you're got 3 or 4 guys and then not a lot else, you're going to force him into being with that one group. So you may force it along a little bit more. And I don't think Braylon is so good compared to the other players on the roster that you need to necessarily force him to that degree. Now, I personally think that what I would say would be more so is not so much that I got to develop him to where he can be an every down player, but I still feel like a guy with Braylon James's speed, I've got to find something for him to do, even if it's like, hey, early on the season, we're going to get you in kind of early of a couple blowouts, and we're going to throw you the ball and try to get you going, because if the light can go on sometime during your year one, you just added a 6'2.5", 6'3" kid that can run faster than anybody else that you have at that position.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I view that one. So it just depends on a lot of different circumstances for a guy. And then the other part, Ryan, too, is where is his game? I mean, there's all types of different raw. There's raw technically, and then there's raw physically. If it's a raw technical thing, then I can get that guy ready by his freshman year if he's an early enrollee. If he's raw physically, I can't work. I mean, the whole miracle drug to work him quickly is illegal. It's called steroids and HGH, and I'm not doing that, right? So he's going to need time. Jason Robinson is going to be as technically ready to play as anybody that Notre Dame could potentially land in the 2024 class, but he may not be ready to play a lot of snaps as a freshman physically.
Yeah.
He might be. We'll see. I'm just using an example of a guy that's a dramatic the other way.
Yeah.
He has his game is like college ready now as a route runner. I mean, like right now, but he's 145, 150 pounds. So, but that's going to kind of be the bigger question mark.
Hey, Jason Robinson is listed at 170. I don't know what you're talking about, man.
He ain't 170 pounds.
I know he's not.
But you look at like the Jahan Dotson, right? Like Jahan Dotson became a great player, but his first 2 years, he was just kind of a lightly used rotation guy. Caught 13 passes in 8 games as a freshman in 2018. You bring him along, but that's kind of where I'm at on it too. Right?
I could see Braylon like catching, 6 to 8 passes, but it's like 25 yards a pop and maybe a touchdown or two. You know what I mean? Like just to create some big plays. I can see it.
Yeah. Here's a funny one here, Ryan.
From Domer Grizz says, which reference is better for the mum's the word injury reporting approach this year? Ailments that shall not be named, Voldemort's, or we don't talk about injuries. No. Oh, the Bruno reference. I know that one for sure.
Have you not seen Harry Potter?
No, I've seen Harry Potter. I actually just watched I just watched the Deathly Hallows Part 2 the other day for the first time in a long time. So yes, I've seen Harry.
Okay.
Yep.
I would say it's a little bit more of it's kind of a combination of both. There's time like right after practice, it's no. But then afterwards, it's like, okay, it's an ailment that shall not be named, and whatever. It's just I'm not going to comment on this. It's just so
the Bruno stuff is it's ingrained in my mind for having a 2-year-old. So I'll defer to that one.
Yeah. Well,
and Canto, yeah.
All right, here we go.
Good movie. It's pretty good movie, man.
Here's a fun one, Ryan. Here we go.
Yeah. We're waiting. Your top 5 Notre Dame tight ends of all time or time you were alive. It's a good one. I've been alive.
I only go with time I've been alive, Ryan.
Yeah.
I mean, I never saw Ken McAfee play. I never saw Dave Casper play. I can't reference them. So for me, it's late 80s and beyond. So like Mark Bavaro's not on my list because I know what Mark Bavaro was in the pros, sadly, as a Broncos fan, but I don't know what he was in college. The top 2 are easy. It's Michael Mayer and Tyler Eifert. That's an easy one.
Yep.
After that, it gets a little bit fuzzy because some of the guys that to me are no-brainers, like Irv Smith would be a no-brainer, but Irv Smith's production was like, it wasn't that great, but he was just really good. He was really talented. He was just a product of a system that for a team that didn't throw the ball a lot to tight. I mean, for a team that produced tight ends the way that Notre Dame produced tight ends in college, Ryan, it is amazing to me how little production that they had during the Lou Holtz era.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is wild. It really is wild when you look at it. Like they just didn't put up a lot of stats. I mean, they made big plays, but they didn't put up a lot of stats. I mean, Irv Smith and Derek Brown were back-to-back first-round draft picks. I mean, starting tight ends. Irv Smith only had one season where he caught more than 6 passes, and that year was 20 catches for 262 yards and 2 touchdowns. Right? He was a first-round pick. Derek Brown never had more than 22 catches or 325 yards in a season. That's like a good month for Michael Mayer. You know what I mean?
Or a good season for Josh Wiley.
Yeah. It's just different offenses. But Irv Smith was really good.
Yeah.
I was not a huge Kyle Rudolph fan in college because he just was never healthy. When he played, he was pretty good, but John Carlson had kind of just that one good year. Anthony Fasano had a couple good years. If I'm going to top 5 in my life, Mayer, Eifert, Irv Smith, Derek Brown, and I'd have to pick between Kyle Rudolph and Anthony Fasano. Probably would be my next group.
Yeah.
Maybe John Carlson. Those 3 are battling it out for my number 5 spot, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's Michael Mayer, Tyler Eifert. We have the same top 2. It would probably be John Carlson. I know you said he only had one season, but it was a really good
his
year.
last year wasn't his fault. He had 40 catches for 370 yards on that 07 team. It wasn't. In 06 with Brady Quinn, he was really good.
Yeah, and he ended up being a good pro for a few years as well. So he would probably be 3. Number 4 is probably Anthony Fasano. Anthony Fasano was really good his last 2 years, right? And then number 5 is
for your age, I'm surprised.
Cole
Kmet or Durham Smythe.
Yeah, probably Cole Kmet. I probably Cole
Kmet. You had Kyle
5.
Rudolph in there, right? Didn't you say he was
I did
4?
not have Kyle Rudolph in there. No.
Okay. I mean, he should be in there over Cole Kmet, in my opinion, because he was still productive.
Fine.
I mean, he was still productive. He just never played a full season.
Yeah.
But I mean, Cole Kmet's last year at Notre Dame was pretty good.
Yeah, he was really good.
His
game against Georgia that year was awesome.
Man.
Great game against Georgia.
Yes, he was excellent.
Yeah.
And to me, I thought there was a game. I mean, there's a lot of games where he should have had even more production than he did. I mean, a lot more production than he did. But Kyle Rudolph still had 3 years of over 28 catches or more and over 300 yards. I mean, he still had over 1,000 career yards, at Notre Dame. So
turned into a good NFL player.
I'm okay with you putting Cole Kmet over Kyle Rudolph. That's fine. I just was curious as to kind of how it is. So
yeah,
that's an interesting one. Very interesting one. All right, here we go, Ryan. Let's keep rolling.
From Andre Tonsel, within each position group, name one player that's going to be your standout player for the year.
Okay, it's an interesting one. Right, let's go quarterback, Sam Hartman.
Yep.
Running back,
Audric Estime.
Agree. Wide receiver, I'm going Tobias.
I'll go Deion Colsey.
Okay, I like that. You're sticking to your guns. I'm digging that. Tight end.
Yep. Mitchell Evans.
Another one. Okay, I'll be with you on that one.
Go Mitchell.
Offensive line, let's take Joe Alt out. Let's take Joe Alt out and say who else. That's the easy one.
Blake Fisher. Fisher.
I'm with you there. D-line.
Riley Mills.
See, I was going to trick you and go with that one, but you took it. That's a good one. Linebacker.
Yep. JD.
Agree.
Yes.
Now, JD will be standout. I think that, but I could see us talking a lot about Jalen Snead and Nolan Ziegler by season's end because they're going to make some big plays. I could see that.
I really hope so.
Let's go corner.
Corner, Benjamin Morrison or Cam Hart. I mean, you could have either one.
Yep. Pick one. And then safety. This is an easy one for me.
Xavier Watts.
Agree. A lot of agreement there, Mr. Roberts. We're going to have to talk about this because,
Yeah.
we start thinking too much the same way. It might be.
I went first on a lot of those.
You did. No, you did. You did. Yeah. I just was agreed. Let's keep rolling. We agree. Let's roll. All right, here we go. T-Guns, Crocs, and Glocks. Let's roll.
Potential to have Jabron Payne and the Jadarian Price back for kickoff return left and right. Who gets more chances to return? Who has a higher return average? Which one takes it to the house first?
Well, I wouldn't assume that Chris Tyree won't be back there this year. I don't think that's a safe assumption. Of those two, I mean, there's just potential. There's potential there, Ryan, for sure. If Chris Tyree, I've said this before, I'm not going to change my mind now. If Chris Tyree is getting a lot of burn on offense and a lot of touches, so he's averaging around 10 touches a game, I'm totally fine with them putting either Jadarian Price, some combination of Jadarian Price and Jabron Payne and Jeremiah Love and Micah Bell back as kick returners. I'm totally fine with that. And then just taking Chris Tyree completely off of it if he's getting a lot of burn consistently at receiver. Just to take some of the wear and tear and create opportunities for those young guys to get touches. With Jadarian, it just depends on so much on does he get his burst back or not. And we haven't seen him practice yet, so I can't speak that he is. So it's potentially there. Who would get first chance? I would imagine Jadarian in that scenario.
Yeah,
but having Jabron back there is not an outlandish thing because he's already done it. I mean, we've already seen him be back there, and I'd have no problem with him being back there doing it as well.
I think you have some legit options at kick return this year, man.
Yeah.
Like, there's not really bad answers here, right? It's like Jadarian would be really good. I think Jeremiah Love would be very good. Chris Tyree has had very good moments as a kick returner already in his Notre Dame career. Jabron Payne, I think, is a player that would be good in that situation. Out of this, though, I mean, Tommy, in your situation, I think the Jadarian would probably be the better kick returner if he's healthy. I mean, there's like caveats here, but he's a very explosive player, no doubt.
Yeah. All right, here's one, Ryan, from Bailey Brad.
And their question is, with Caleb Downs already making noise in Alabama's spring practice, what are some recruits from last year you are excited to see on the field in 2023?
Well, let's take out the pain in my heart as a Notre Dame fan for these. Caleb Downs is definitely one. Dante Moore is one. I am really looking forward to seeing what Dante's going to do this year really looking forward to seeing what he's going to do this year, Ryan, in a UCLA uniform. I really am. He's going to be fun to watch, I think. I really do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Dante Moore, I think, is going to be the starting quarterback for UCLA probably like week 3. Probably, right? Like,
or quarter 3 of week 1. I mean, you know what I mean?
Possible.
Like,
it's very possible, man.
If they're smart, if Chip Kelly's smart, I'd really like to see him. Actually, let me look at their schedule. Let me just look at UCLA's schedule real quick, because this factors into it as well, Ryan, kind of what their schedule looks like. Let's go to USC 2023 football schedule. They start off with Coastal Carolina, then play at San Diego State, then home against NC Central. Like, if I'm them and I'm smart, I'm bringing him off the bench against Coastal and San Diego State, and then his first career start's going to be against NC Central. That's what I would do. Make his first start an easy one. Don't make his first career start at Utah.
Right.
Like, just don't do that. Just no, don't do that.
Yeah,
but
this is probably my favorite player in the class too. Just like guys, man. Like, I loved Caleb Downs.
Your mic just went out, Ryan. You're now being we're not hearing you through the computer.
Okay.
So I just heard it go out. So some other guys. I mean, look, I think it's going to be fun. They're not going to put up probably big numbers because there's so many other good receivers there. But I think at least one Ohio State receiver is going to step up this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing who that's going to be as sort of a nice number 3 or 4 that is going to be the guy the next year, whether it's Brandon Ennis or Cardinal Tate or Noah Rogers. Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to seeing those guys kind of play next year. I think they're going to be really, really good players.
Can I give you an underrated one? That's maybe not as, like, he won't have a pronounced freshman year, but I think you'll get a glimpse. I think Pierce Spurlin for Georgia as the backup tight end could, like, you'd be like, oh, who the heck's that kid? And then all of a sudden he's the tight end 1 in 2024. Like, he's that type of kid, I think. I
like Deuce Robinson at USC. I think he's going to be fun to watch in that offense. I hope he doesn't play well in that October game against them, but he's a guy that I think is going to be fun to watch.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of some other guys that are actually going to play a lot as freshmen.
Rodney Gallagher's probably going to be a dog for West Virginia.
Yeah, so. They're going to need him. They're going to definitely need him. There's no doubt about that. Now, the Pierce Spurlin one is interesting, and Georgia really needed Deuce Robinson, man. They really, really needed him, in my opinion. Zachariah Branch is going to be another interesting guy at USC. I'm curious to see if they're able to use him in the return game at all.
He's lightning in a bottle, man.
Yeah,
he's
he really is. He really is. I'm curious to see if Jeremiah Cobb can get on the field at Auburn. He's a running back, very underrated running back. Actually, he ended up not being underrated when it was all said and done, but he's a running back that I like a lot. Texas got a safety from Louisiana that I love that I could see getting on the field next year. A kid named Derek Williams. Have you ever seen him?
No.
Love Derek Williams as a player, and that's a position where I think they might need a little bit of help. So those are some of the guys just kind of off the top of my head, Ryan, that I think could be. Here's one. Here's a freshman I think could end up doing something. I don't know why he's not ranked higher by some people, but Shelton Sampson. I could see Shelton. I've always talked about Shelton Sampson, man. I love that kid's game. It would not shock me one bit if Shelton Sampson's playing a bunch for USC or for LSU this year. It would not shock me at all. Tall kid, can stretch the field. I think he brings an element that they need a little bit more of in their offense, is just that big, tall, vertical guy. I could see him playing that role for them this year for sure. Those are some other guys that kind of pop in my head as guys we might see, non-Notre Dame guys that we might see early for their careers. I think Dylan Edwards is going to get the ball at Colorado.
Oh, probably a lot. Yeah.
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 Yeah. He's a guy that I think will do some stuff there. Again, we're talking some of the guys that Notre Dame recruited, but those are guys that just kind of like rivals, and you have Shelton Sampson in the top 100. Make that make sense for me. I don't understand that. I just don't get it. I don't get it. All right, here we go. Here's one from Chili2177.
The question is, it's been said Ohio State offered a 5-star Indiana kid before he had any stars, Mylan Graham. Is Heartline just that good at identifying talent, and did we offer too late?
And Notre Dame offered him this past summer.
Yeah.
The reason Notre Dame had no chance of getting Mylan Graham into school is because into the class is because they couldn't get Mylan Graham into school. And I don't want to dive too deep into that, but I mean, Ohio State offered him 4 days before Notre Dame did. I mean, they beat him by 4 days. That's not going to keep him from wanting to go to Notre Dame. Because Notre Dame wasn't going to offer him until he was coming for the Irish Invasion. They offered him at the Irish Invasion. So he's good at identifying talent, sure. But Mylan Graham wasn't a surprise to anybody. Notre Dame loved Mylan Graham. They still love Mylan Graham as a player. They just can't get him into school. And so that's why there was never any traction there.
And he's going to be great. He's going to be great at Ohio State. So
yeah, it's a good question, Chili, because I get Chill's question. It's like you're looking at a kid that's from Fort Wayne. Notre Dame's had some really good players from Fort Wayne. Why aren't you recruiting this kid? How do you let a kid an hour and a half from your campus go to Columbus? Because they couldn't get him. They just couldn't get him in school. So it's a very, very fair question. But I have no problem hammering Notre Dame for misses. We've had this. How many times have we hammered them for not getting on Justin Scott sooner and not making him so I don't mind doing it if it's correct. It's just in this instance, there's just nothing the staff could have done with this one. And they got on. I think Notre Dame was the second big offer he had, I believe. So I don't fault him on that one, right?
Some things are out of the coaching staff's control.
It really is. It really is.
One of them.
Let's keep rolling here.
Question from Irish Blooded. When would you say is the last year Notre Dame had an overall offense with this much upside?
2015. Easy. 2015. I mean, they haven't had an offense with this much ceiling since 2015. It's not even close, Ryan. It's not even close, in my opinion.
Everything working. Yeah, I agree.
Loaded. Because again, we're talking about going into the season where Torian Folston and CJ Prosise and Durham Smythe, the tight end, and Malika quarterback, and all the talent you had coming back in the offensive line, and Will Fuller and Amir Carlisle, finally becoming a full-time receiver late in the year. I mean, that team, and you had a freshman class coming in of Equanimous St. Brown and Kevin Stefferson and CJ Sanders coming in.
Man, Kevin Stefferson still breaks my heart, man. He still breaks my heart.
I mean, so you're talking about, or excuse me, no, I'm sorry. Stefferson was in the next year's class. The 15 class was Equanimous St. Brown, Miles Boykin, and CJ Sanders.
Still good.
Was in that class. It's a very good class. So, and I liked Mike Denbrock as a play caller. I did. And you had Harry Heaton as your offensive line coach. So, I was excited about Archie Denson coming in as the running backs coach, replacing Tony Alford. I thought, he could maybe keep that going. Yeah, 15 is without question the last time. And this group has a chance to be better than that because this team will have a better defense, in my opinion. And I think this team be a little bit more – CJ Prosise is really dynamic, but he wasn't a natural running back. And you got against some of the better teams on the schedule. Like he couldn't find the holes that were there for 3, 4, 5 yards against Clemson and Ohio State in limited time before he, got knocked out of that game as well. And then of course he couldn't take the pounding because he wasn't used to it, which is why part of the reason he got hurt that season and got knocked out. But man, with him being the number 2 with Folston, that would have been so much fun to watch.
Yes.
So much fun to watch. All right, let's move on, Rye.
From T Guns, Crocs and Glocks. I know we don't really do the transitive property things, but since Clemson struggled with both Hartman's passing and Notre Dame's running, can we assume Notre Dame is putting 60 up on them this year?
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me?
You're setting high standards there, Tommy. Setting high standards, man. Can we just win for the second straight year? Like, can we just win?
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's no. They're not going to hang 60 on them. And luckily, we all know that the transitive property doesn't work.
Yes.
So, yeah. Oh, my goodness. Let's go to Joe Medina. Let's get last two before you got to get out of here, Ryan, and then I'll answer a couple more before we go.
From Joe, we said, how's Hartman doing in spring practice? I've heard other Notre Dame insiders say he's struggling, which is understandable given the change of offense.
I don't think he's really struggling, and that my sources haven't indicated this. I think part of the issue is understanding what a practice is supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Like practices, if every practice is structured different, you're working on different things. So from what I've been told and what we had on our intel piece, Joe, I mean, we had it on our message board last week that he's been better than advertised. Does he look like he's in midseason form? No, of course not. But he's been good. I mean, he's throwing the ball up, developing a relationship with the players, the receivers, and he's been good. He's been good. So is Tyler. They've both been very good so far. I think people are overreacting a little bit too much to a blitz practice, a practice where they literally spent the entire practice blitzing. And anyone who's ever coached football a day in their life knows that's not going to be a day where your quarterbacks are going to look any good unless your defense is garbage.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame's defense is not garbage.
They are not.
They're not.
Super chat from Mark 1. Thank you so much, Mark. I think Sam is an upgrade. I like Chris moving to receiver since the backfield is loaded. What's your thoughts? Sam is an upgrade. I 100% agree. Based upon what we saw last year for Notre Dame, there's no doubt. He is an upgrade. Chris, moving the wide receiver.
Huge upgrade.
Sorry, I undersold it there. Massive upgrade there, Sam Hartman. There's no doubt. The Chris Tyree, I'm still, honestly, Mark, I'm still wrapping my mind around it in the sense that I want to see exactly how he's used all the time, right? Like, I think it opens endless possibilities. I love it in the sense that, like, let's get him involved in the screen game. Some easy, option routes underneath. Let's get him some jet sweeps. Let's work him in the backfield at times. Like, I think there's so many cool things that you can do with Chris Tyree in that running back, wide receiver hybrid position. Just want to kind of see what they have planned. It's like, I don't think you 100% know exactly what they're going to do with them, but it's interesting. Yeah. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yep. I like the move as if it was still doing both. That's the only thing. I still want to see him. And he can even do it at a receiver. I still want to see Chris Tyree getting the football on handoffs. That's my only thing. So that's a big part for me. Ryan, you got to run? I'm going to get a couple more questions in. I know you got to run. I'm just going to get a couple more here. There's a couple more questions that I wanted to kind of get to. We're not going to be able to get to all of them because, like I said, we do have to kind of run. Here was one from Mike Sullivan I did want to address. Mike asked, can we trust Sam Hartman enough to not run a scan offense all game? Absolutely. That's gone. Now, there will be times. And every spread air raid offense does this. You're going to look to the sideline at times, and that's something they should do. It's just not something you want to do as much as Notre Dame did last year. That was way too much. They did it way too much last year. And so you'll see some of that, but they're not going to run it as, to the point where, like, you can call the offense a scan offense. So I think we're not going to see that. We're not going to see that. Ray Holcraft asks, seems Notre Dame has a lot of talent at the wide receiver position, elite talent. What are the steps a receivers coach takes to help receivers reach their potential? No, there's several. This is a great question, Ray. Number one is, obviously, you've got to get them comfortable with the basics, fundamentals. And the reason I say that first instead of the offense, and what I think a mistake a lot of football coaches make is when players aren't certain of what they're doing fundamentally, it's going to hold back their ability to go make plays schematically. I think the biggest thing to do, that's why I've said the spring needs to be a big back to basics period for football teams. You line up, technique, attention to detail, all the finer points of playing the position mechanically, technically, fundamentally. I think that's a big one. Great attention to detail, always demanding. It's not good enough. Just always pushing them. Value your craft. Those are very, very important parts of playing that position. Number two, I think the next part is just really finding things that they all do well and building on those things that they all do well first. And then as they master those things, then start improving some of the areas that you need to improve. I think the other part of it is obviously schematically. I think one thing Notre Dame does a good job of with their receivers is they teach them the pass concepts holistically and how they all play together. And I think that's important for receivers. I think it's not wise to necessarily teach a guy only his position. It's one thing if you're talking about like a freshman who you're going to put into one spot and he's going to run some basic routes, but even then he's got to understand what's happening around him, or he's not going to necessarily understand how to break off his routes properly. So I think just teaching them schematically. And then the last part is you've got to balance putting them in positions where they're going to not have good days and to really press them, and also combine that with building up their confidence. you can't make it so easy that you're always put them in a position to be successful. I've talked about this in the past. You've got to have periods and practices, and this is what I think the open practice was for us. Is you've got to have practices where, not that let me make sure I'm clear on this. I'm not saying the open practice was designed to be this for us. What I'm saying is the open practice we saw was designed to be a day where the offense was being put in a lot of tough situations because the defense was working on their dime, their nickel, their blitz packages, and that's going to be tough for an offense that's in practice like 5 or 6. And it's good because those are days where you really learn mental toughness. You fail, you have some failure. Okay, how do we pick that up? What do we got to do differently next time? And it helps build up mental toughness, and also helps you see who is really the mentally tough guys that can bounce back from a practice like that. But then you as a coach have to say, okay, but now my goal is that we had a rough day. Now my goal is to say, okay, how do I get on them? But also then build them up to say, hey, we're going to go out there next time and really get after it. So I think the technical, the schematic, and the mental parts are the key. And the mental part is not schematic for me. The mental part has to do with confidence, has to do with their self-belief as a player, their ability to handle adversity, to handle dropping a ball, running a route wrong, getting ripped by the coach, getting beat off the line, whatever the case may be. Mentally, how do they handle success? How do they handle failure? And how can you help them maintain peak confidence? I think those are all very, very important parts of what it's like to be a really great receivers coach. And that kind of plays into another question that Ray had earlier about how much importance do you place in the mental part of the game for a receiver to be great. Fuller seemed to have great focus. It seems to be an intangible that is hard to assess in a player. It's incredibly important. And it's not just about focusing on the ball, but it's what I just talked about. It's the ability to take pride in your craft, but also to mentally know if you don't have your technique mastered, then you're not going to create the same separation on how much you have the scheme mastered. And if you have the fundamentals mastered, but not the scheme, then you're not going to be as good as you need to be. The mental part of the game is important. And to your point, the mental part of the game, to your question, Ray, can mean schematic and can mean understanding how to get open, how to work the field, how to handle this guy, how to handle that guy. And you've worked on it so much that it's just natural. Okay, guys playing me here. I just look at him, outside leverage, 6 yards off the ball, slanted this way. I know how I got to tackle him. And then if he moves post snap, I immediately know how to alter it. It just becomes second nature, right? So they say like riding a bike. It just becomes second. I just know. Get on the bike. I know what to do. I know where to go. I know how to turn. I know to do all those things. Same thing for playing receiver. You need to get to that point. And then, of course, the other part of the mental stuff is the mental toughness, the focus, but also bouncing back from mistakes. And then mental toughness can also be, how do you handle success? Go out and have a couple big games and then say, hey, great. I'm excited. I had big games, but I'm not done yet. I got a lot more work to do. And still got to get a lot better. I think those are the things that you say. That's what a receivers coach has to be great at. He has to be great at developing them mentally and technically. I think the best coaches do both, in my opinion. So that's going to do it. We couldn't get to all the questions today. There was a lot of great questions. Kenneth James had a really good question, or a really good one from Tyler Smith. I hope we could get to one of Andre Tonsil that I wanted to get to, but we just we ran out of time. I got some other things that we got to run over to. I got to get this podcast cut up. But a lot of great questions today. I enjoyed today's discussion. I want to thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow for our Friday mailbag. So if you had some questions they didn't get to, please bring those over tomorrow, because all we're going to do tomorrow is answer questions. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Thank you all so much. Please hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Make sure that you are subscribed to the CFB Nation channel as well. And share that with your friends. And of course, as always, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.